Chapter 246. Enchanted Night. This was a term that everyone in St. Freya Academy knew. It was also the first gift that every freshman received after entering the academy. It represented opportunities and challenges, and performing well on Enchanted Night was also the goal of many students before they entered the academy. Although the name sounded scary, Enchanted Night was actually the first night that students spent in the academy. However, it was different due to the guidance elves and the curse vessel in their hands. Guidance elves, also known as little elves, were a kind of intelligent life inherited from ancient times. They were called elves, but in fact, this kind of elves did not have a specific appearance or gender. They were more like a kind of curse power with a certain level of self-consciousness. There were different opinions about the birth of little elves. Some people thought that it was a product of nature, and some said that it was the creation of some great existence. There was no specific conclusion so far. However, it was not important to most people how it came to be. They only cared about what it was used for. The guiding elves themselves were not very useful, and they were completely harmless. In most cases, they would be seen as fireflies. However, in the Kingdom of Scholars, guiding elves were highly valued because they were often the key to guiding others into the Hidden Realm. The Hidden Realm was a unique situation in the country of scholars. No one knew where it was located. Only by following the guidance elves could one enter. However, it was more similar to the concept of divinity or shuttling in Luo Ya's previous life. The guidance elves would only guide one person into the Hidden Realm each time. It was kind of exclusive. As a creation of curse power, they were very sensitive to the different types of curse power between people. Therefore, there was no possibility of sneaking in. The people who were guided would often disappear in a flash, and no one could follow them. The establishment of the country of scholars could be said to be due to the variety of hidden realms and ancient ruins nearby. In this area of the academy, there was a famous hidden realm, Enchanted Night. Enchanted Night could only be entered once, and it could only be entered at night. It was one of the rare hidden realms that was harmless. It was similar to a dreamlike hidden realm that mixed illusion and reality. The damage suffered in it would disappear when one returned to reality. This characteristic made it very popular among the educators in the academy. It could let the young masters and young mistresses, who had just left the protection of their families, experience the cruelty of actual combat and could prevent them from suffering any substantial injuries as soon as they entered the school. Moreover, it did not require any manpower or material resources. If they did not use such a perfect natural secret realm, it would be a waste of the land under their feet. Although there was no problem with the ability to guide the elves, whether they were willing to work or not was another matter. After all, humans couldn't force them. They could only use curse power to make them happy like coaxing children. In fact, the teachers distributed the curse vessel to the students during the day to let the guide elves and students reach a tacit understanding. As for what would happen if he failed, then he could only drink the northwest wind and stroll around the academy for a night. Feeling the gradually intimate attitude of the elf in the curse vessel under stimulation, Luo Ya's face gradually became weird. Lock them up, stimulate them, and gradually become obedient. This, cough cough. The black-haired young man coughed twice and hurriedly threw some bad things out of his mind. After observing the curse vessel for a while, Luo Ya put it in his pocket, raised his head, and looked at the food that had just been served on the table. He was quietly relieved. As a foodie, delicious food was the source of joy in Luo Ya's life. Especially after obtaining extraordinary power and being able to maintain his body shape on the premise of eating to his heart's content, Luo Ya worked harder in this regard. However, before coming to school, the young man was a little worried. The campus cafeteria was a nightmare that Luo Ya couldn't get rid of in his previous life. Until now, when he recalled the campus life in his previous life, Luo Ya couldn't forget the dark cuisine. Spicy fried mooncake, strawberry fried celery, watermelon stewed meat. Ugh. Luo Ya, who was inexplicably disgusted, hurriedly stopped his memories and raised his eyes to stare at the dishes in front of him. St. Freya College was a rich college. Most of the students were aristocrats from all over the world. In terms of food, it could be said that they took good care of the students. Not only were there special restaurants from all over the world, but there were also restaurants opened by famous chefs. They even converged into a food street. It felt like a cluster of Michelin three-star restaurants. However, considering the different family conditions of the students, naturally, not all of them were high-end restaurants. There were also student cafeterias subsidized by the school. Most of them were in the form of a buffet. Although the taste was not very high-end, it was never bad. As for why Luoya, as a superior aristocrat, would eat in this affordable cafeteria, it was naturally because of the two girls. After experiencing the two classes at the opening ceremony, Luoya could be said to be physically and mentally exhausted. Naturally, he didn't want to suffer again during the mealtime. So, as soon as the meal ended, he immediately found a reason to say goodbye to the two girls who wanted to feed him. In order not to meet them again, he slipped here. The affordable cafeteria was destined to be a place where Nua Iyer and Xia Luot couldn't come. It was not because the two were delicate. In fact, Nua Iyer had eaten military food on the Eastern Front. It obviously didn't taste good. When Xia Luot was in the Golden Ship crew, she was also very friendly in the face of seafaring food. The real reason why they couldn't come was the impact of their status. Her Royal Highness and Miss ate in the affordable cafeteria. How could the underlings go to a high-end restaurant? Obviously, any underling with a little brain would not do so. The final result could only be hundreds of people from both sides crowded in the civilian cafeteria, leaving those who really needed affordable food without food. Tasting the tender chicken cooked in his mouth, the black-haired young man nodded slightly while taking out the pendant in front of his chest. He looked at the curse vessel named Steel Amber and fell into deep thought. In addition to the flag, Roha didn't forget his other important purpose. The Entcade did say that the Sage of the Twilight was in St. Freya's College. If he is still alive, he will see the Steel Amber. Whether it is good or bad, he will take action. What a beautiful pendant! Huh! The sudden praise made Luoya couldn't help but raise his head. He found that a red-haired woman had sat down across the table with a plate of food. She narrowed her light blue eyes and smiled at him meaningfully. Good afternoon. Are you Luoya Akate? Chapter 247. On both sides of the dining table in St. Freya Academy's cafeteria, there was a pair of good-looking people looking at each other. One of them was a handsome black-haired young man, his golden pupils revealing a little confusion. The other was a tall, red-haired beauty, her light blue eyes full of unknown emotions. The age gap between the two seemed to be about 10 years. It was a perfect combination of a big sister and a young man. If the two of them were to appear in a movie or TV series in his previous life, it would probably cause quite a lot of people to think about them. In fact, there were indeed a lot of students who noticed this rare combination on campus and cast their gazes over. Under the curious gaze of the crowd, Luoya held the steel amber pendant in his hand and blinked at the woman opposite him. For a moment, he couldn't react. What's going on? I just took it out, and someone is already looking for it? Is this person the scholar? No, that's impossible. Luoya observed the beautiful big sister opposite him and shook his head slowly in his heart. The issue of age wasn't a big deal. After all, the age and appearance of transcendence generally didn't match, especially women, but the difference in behavior was too big. According to Elizabeth's description, the scholar was a very cautious person. After joining the association for many years, she hadn't revealed her identity. Although the Twilight Sage Association had disappeared for hundreds of years, there was no reason for her to be so rash as to approach Luoya as soon as he took out the token. Or rather, if she was the scholar, she might temporarily stay away from him. Then, could it be another member? Or a descendant of another member? Thinking of this, Luoya's eyes lit up. He nodded with a smile on his face. Yes, I'm Luoya, a cart. May I ask who you are? My name is Chris Worth, a teacher here. I see. Hello, Teacher Chris. May I ask what's the matter? It's nothing. I just found out that I have some connections with you. We have some common acquaintances, so I came to talk to you. The red-haired beauty said so. She held a fork in her hand and pointed at the plate in front of her. On the other side, Luoya was shocked. Connections? Common acquaintances? Is it the scholar? No, wait. From the way she saw Iron Amber talking to him, could it be that she knew Cade? So Cade did say that a woman had come to him a month before Luoya went to Sharon Forest. Could that person be the teacher in front of him? Did he really encounter a descendant of the Twilight Sage Society? Luoya became excited as she thought of this. On the other side, Chris was still maintaining his elegant smile. Chris Worth, 36 years old this year, was the only son of the University of Bologna family. He graduated from St. Freya Academy 18 years ago, and since then, he had stayed in the school as a teacher. Because of his superb strength, huge connections, and far superior teaching results, he became one of the few sage mentors in the academy at the age of 30. Outstanding ability, a good family background, coupled with seductive beauty and sexy figure, the number of men pursuing Chris could form a strong company after so many years. However, she was still unmarried. It was rumored that she couldn't forget her former senior, and in fact, that was indeed the case. Kadia Akat was Chris' former senior, and also the person who changed her life. People today probably couldn't imagine that Chris, the youngest sage mentor in history, was once a rebellious girl when she first entered the academy. Her rebellion against her family made her full of disgust for this place, until a senior became her partner. In St. Freya Academy, it was normal for students under the same mentor to help each other. Among them, the most common pattern was for outstanding senior students to form a partnership with unsatisfactory junior students. Chris's partner was Kadia, but unlike other partners who only worked on the surface, Kadia was very serious and responsible, constantly persuading Chris to return to the right path. In the process, the two inevitably had a lot of contact and conflict, and Chris's emotions constantly changed over time, from resistance and disgust to being moved, and finally falling in love. Chris was already very talented, and in order to gain the admiration of her sweetheart, she worked even harder. Her grades and strength soared like a rocket, but unfortunately, this feeling was destined to be unreciprocated. Kadia fell in love with Luoya's mother, and because of this, he even cut off all contact with Chris and said very heartless words. After graduation, the two returned to Leinster and got married. After Kadia graduated, Chris tried hard and struggled, but she couldn't forget this feeling in her heart. She started to hate Kadia for being so heartless. However, as the saying goes, where there are gains, there are losses. In order to make up for the pain in her heart, Chris spent all her time improving her strength and training students. This was how she became a sage mentor at a young age and waited until Luoya entered the academy. The person I'm talking about, do you know who it is? With a smile on her face, Chris waited for Luoya to ask questions, ready to give him a surprise. However, she didn't expect Luoya to nod after cautiously scanning the surroundings. He knows? Chris looked at the calm Luoya and blinked. She didn't know where he heard it from. After thinking for a while, the red-haired woman asked hesitantly, "Could it be he mentioned me to you?" Of course he did. Luoya recalled Cade's words in Sharon Forest and nodded firmly. What he said made Chris's heart skip a beat. Chapter 248. There are strange fluctuations in the secret realm recently? On the other side of the table, the black-haired teenager was stunned when he heard the red-haired woman's words. He couldn't help but recall the plot of Recorder's Eye in his previous life. He blinked with a puzzled expression. In Roja's previous life, the game was like a prophecy book. Now, he almost summed up a rule. That is, if you don't interfere too much, then some of the plots in the game have a high probability of repeating in reality. Of course, as Luoya entered the academy, the reference value of the prophecy book Recorder's Eye would definitely decrease. In fact, it was basically ineffective now in the heroine aspect. However, in the entrance ceremony, it should still be able to play its original function. However, the recent instability of the secret realm was not mentioned in the game. This is for you. The lamp oil of the Lamp of Finding is a safety device. Ignite it and follow its guidance. It will take you out of the secret realm. The red-haired woman took out a finger-sized bottle and handed it to Luoya as she spoke. The teenager reached out and took a closer look. He found that it was a wooden cylinder-like curse vessel. Judging from the touch, it was indeed liquid inside. After giving the props, Chris left a few words of advice and left. As a teacher in the academy, her behavior was actually on the verge of violating the rules. Naturally, she couldn't continue to attract others' attention here. Looking at the red-haired woman's back, the black-haired teenager couldn't help but sigh. This descendant of the Sage Society was truly a passionate person. It seemed that his ancestor was an old friend of Cade's. Perhaps he had even left some words on the Tyrant. He was so happy when he heard that he could contact Cade. However, he left too quickly. He didn't even have the time to ask about the scholar. Luoya looked at the lamp oil in his hand and could only regret being distracted. However, considering that both of them were in the academy, it was not urgent to ask about the scholar. Now, the opening ceremony was even more strange. While eating and playing with the pencil-sized wooden cylinder in his hand, Luoya thought for a while and felt that it was nothing. During the opening ceremony in the game, Paul was only at source level 5 just like in reality. He didn't have any cheats, so he was quickly eliminated. Moreover, there were no acquaintances in the academy. Maybe there were fluctuations in the secret realm in the game, but Paul's level was too low to reach it. And even if there were, so what? How could a mystic realm be more dangerous than a historical fragment? Thinking of this, Luoya shook her head. She put away the small wooden cylinder and left the cafeteria. She began to wander around the campus with the guide elf. There were still a few hours before Devil's Night, and the academy was filled with students wandering around with small balls in their hands. Not everyone was successful in pleasing the little elves. In fact, most of the elves in their hands were still very cold, but Luoya was an exception. At this time, beside the black-haired boy, the guide sprite was flying around with the heavy curse vessel shell. It circled around him intimately, surprising many students along the way. They came forward to ask for advice, which gave Luoya a headache. Would you believe me if I said I didn't do anything? Luoya dealt with the distressed students. Looking at this lively little thing, he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He also felt a little strange. Luoya remembered that Paul spent the whole afternoon coaxing this little thing. Originally, Luoya was also prepared for a long war, but he didn't expect that the situation would become like this soon after the curse power touched it. Is it because of the source substance? Crown. Source substance has the talent of training? The black-haired boy who couldn't figure it out shook his head. In any case, it was a good thing to familiarize himself with the guide elf as soon as possible. After saving a lot of time, Luoya didn't stay idle. Instead, he walked in the direction of the white building when he entered the school gate. Luoya was not an amnesiac. He naturally wouldn't forget such an incredible thing like resonance reaction. It was necessary to explore it as soon as he had time. The boy even had an inexplicable feeling of being caught in the act. The bloodline of the Akate family was exclusive. The most likely to resonate was naturally a blood relative. In fact, Luoya had begun to wonder if his father couldn't control himself when he was in the academy, and he accidentally left an illegitimate child or something. It was very melodramatic, but in theory, it wasn't impossible. The vigilant Luoya came all the way here, intending to ask about the situation here. But what he didn't expect was that this building was just an empty building with no specific purpose. According to the management here, because this building was close to the school gate and other places, it was generally fought over by various schools and organizations. After the opening season, the building would be empty again. St. Freya Academy covered a vast area, quite similar to the National Forest Park in Luoya's previous life. In addition to the well-maintained central campus, there were also many buildings built with donations from individuals over the past 900 years of the school's establishment. Some nobles even spent money to build houses specifically for living. Therefore, the situation of empty buildings was not uncommon, even serious. About an hour before the opening ceremony, who was here? There should be more students from the school's security department at that time. Of course, there were also many people from the school. Hearing Luoya's question, the black-haired boy fell into deep thought. When new students were admitted, the security department students would be dispatched in large numbers to maintain order. This was normal. But to be honest, Luoya didn't want to deal with this department. The reason was naturally because of Lillian. Looking for someone under the eyes of the Purple Rose was not an easy thing to do. It was likely that he would be regarded as having ulterior motives. And in the end, the school's reason for looking for relatives was very strange. Actually, I have a long-lost relative here. Guess how Lillian would answer this kind of nonsense? It was probably the princess' magnanimity that she didn't make a move. Luoya sighed and shook his head as he left. After walking a distance, he turned back to look at the building. He still couldn't feel at ease. After all, the Akate family was not prosperous, and there weren't many members. Chapter 249. When night fell, a crowd gathered at the edge of St. Freya Academy's misty forest. The noise made this gloomy place, which was rarely visited by the Academy's students, lively. The misty forest, as its name suggested, was filled with fog that contained curse power all year round. In this forest, it was difficult to distinguish directions using curse power, and one could not see the sun. Therefore, countless people had gone missing since ancient times. Therefore, the misty forest was listed as a forbidden area by the Academy. In fact, the misty forest was not only a part of St. Freya Academy. It was more accurate to say that this part of the Academy only accounted for about 10% of the total. The rest extended to the south of Leinster. Due to the extremely high concentration of magic elements, there were abundant resources. Every year, there were desperate adventurers who entered the forest hoping to get rich overnight. However, the result was often one more name added to the list of missing people. Of course, such a mysterious place naturally had some legends. For example, there was a shocking secret hidden in the forest. Such ghost stories might be a little attractive to others, but in Luoya's view, there was nothing to write home about. The reason why so many people gathered here now was that this was the entrance to the secret realm. As long as one had the help of a guide elf blessed by nature, it was still very safe to walk around the periphery of the misty forest. As for those who did not get the favor of the elf in these few hours, I can do it. Let me in. I've been preparing for a long time. Senior, give me another chance. Let me try again. In a corner outside the forest, a group of small balls of cursed beasts flew around several mentors and students. Beside them was a group of students who were either begging or dejected. In order to verify that the students had the cooperation of the elves and would not go missing after entering the forest, the mentors and members of the security department would release a special curse at the entrance to attract the guide elves. Any elves who did not meet the requirements of the cursed beasts would run away on the spot. It was like love. Without the guide elves, the students naturally could not enter the secret realm. They could only wait outside. Of course, there were occasionally some who were restless. It was said that there were stubborn students who wanted to barge in without the elves. As a result, their legs were broken before they could run into the forest. Don't worry, my dear. I will definitely get the ring and build our love nest here. Hee, Miss Luote, what are you talking about? Luoya is my subject, and I am his protector. After I get the ring, of course he should be by my side. Outside the forest, the blonde girl looked at the reddish-brown girl with a smile. She reached out and gently tugged on Luoya's tie as if declaring ownership. On the other side, Xia Luote also showed a kind smile. Indeed, if your highness obtains the ring, Luoya will probably join your faction. But does this have anything to do with me living with my dear? As a monarch, are you going to restrict the freedom of your subordinates? Is your highness such a tyrant? Xia Luote, you. The blonde girl listened to the young lady's words, and her eyes suddenly sharpened. The two looked at each other and did not give in. The black-haired boy sighed silently. He could only pray silently in his heart for the ritual to start quickly. As if hearing his wish, the concentration of magic element in the misty forest under the night began to gradually increase. The guide elves were also restless. It's starting. Yeah. The two girls and Luoya looked at each other. They nodded and separated from each other. They followed their guide elves into the forest. Luoya looked at the backs of the two girls until the fog gradually covered their figures. Then, it's up to you. Carefully opening the curse box, the little elf who heard Luoya's request flew up to the sky and then fell down. After circling the boy a few times, she flew toward the forest. Luoya followed closely. With the increase of steps, the concentration of the white fog in the boy's vision became higher and higher. When it reached a critical value, the surrounding scenery seemed to turn into a blank, and then suddenly changed and quickly dissipated. The vision went from blurred to white for about a few hundred meters, but from white to clear was only a dozen steps. Luoya, who walked out of the fog, looked around and found that he was already in a forest surrounded by giant trees. Judging from the size and type of trees, it was obviously not the misty forest with twisted branches. It was more vibrant, and even Luoya suspected that it was in ancient times. After Luoya, more and more students followed the elves to this area. Due to the individual point system and the random allocation of the secret realm, most of the students did not know each other, and there was no idea of forming a team. After keeping a distance from each other, they prepared for battle. The silence in the forest lasted for a while until a wolf howl broke the silence of the night. Oh! Under the moonlight, pairs of shining eyes began to gradually approach from the forest, and the number was increasing. It was a group of mutated demon wolves, and their strength was about source level 6. Their group was widely distributed in various areas of Shiya. It was the lowest level of demon. Except for the number, they had nothing to show. Under normal circumstances, their main opponent was the militia. At the moment when they saw such a group of monsters, there were many sighs of relief in the crowd. Generally, the freshmen who had reached source level 5 smiled happily as if they had seen victory. After all, the major dividing line of extraordinary strength was between source level 6 and source level 5. In the eyes of most students, source level 6 monsters were their lives to be killed indiscriminately. However, feeling the relaxed atmosphere nearby, Luoya's face became strange. He looked around and found that several students wearing armor also frowned. It seemed that the elimination speed of this opening ceremony was faster than expected. Luoya shook his head helplessly, walked to a position with his back against a boulder, and burned a faint curse power on his body. Tonight, St. Freya Academy was a lively night. The reason for the liveliness was not only because the freshmen accepted the baptism of the entrance ceremony, but also because of the situation outside the arena at this time. In the big arena in the academy, it could be said that it was full of people at this time. The senior students were excitedly looking at the projection of the curse vessel on the field, sometimes applauding and sometimes despising. But now they were not watching the battle of the top 20 students, but the first-person perspective of the visual tracking elves in the entrance ceremony. Yes, this was a broadcast, and it was also one of the most popular activities in the academy every year. Chapter 250. On the viewing platform, Lillian listened to Grimm's words and remained unmoved. Her silence was like encouragement in the eyes of the young man. As a pure-blood aristocrat, Grimm had been educated since he was a child that the purity of the bloodline was nobility. The royal family was the best in this regard, especially the gifted Her Royal Highness. Under the 3 halos of appearance, intelligence, and bloodline, she could be said to be the only goddess in the hearts of Grimm's generation. However, even though Princess Lillian was good, she had a flaw. She was too cold, as if she did not care about anything. Even when Grimm obtained another rose ring for the Austin Empire last year, it did not cause her to feel too much of a stir. However, such an icy beauty had paid special attention to 2 freshmen this year. One was Paul Aikman, and the other was Luoya Akit, who was in the middle of a battle. Although Grimm hated Paul's situation, he could understand it. After all, he had the bloodline of Aikman. Even if he was not a pureblood, he should be taken care of. However, Grimm could not tolerate Luoya's situation. How could an indigenous barbarian of the Saint Maester theocracy make Her Royal Highness look at him differently? He's just a freshman with an ancient curse vessel. There's nothing special about him. I heard about Carlo and the others. This freshman didn't do it himself, right? Grimm looked at Luoya with a glass of wine and couldn't help but smile when he looked at his empty hands. It's a pity that this kind of curse vessel that can attack autonomously is prohibited in the secret mirror. Without that trump card, he will become immortal again. In the eyes of the first-year students, Luoya was the one upholding justice. In the eyes of the second-year students, Grimm was the one who stood up for his seniors. The inherent superiority of the Austin Empire made him full of prejudice. However, all of this was so naive in Lillian's eyes, even a little ridiculous. As a member of the Austin Empire's royal family, Lillian's identity made it necessary for her to acknowledge the pureblood theory. But deep down, She was actually skeptical of this theory of unknown origin. As for why she treated Luoya differently, it was actually based on the suppression of the curse power back then. As a matter of fact, Lillian wanted to give Luoya, who was approaching Paul, a warning. Lillian's coercion wasn't something that could be brushed off with a smile. With the difference in level, even Green would be crushed by her. But what she didn't expect was that Luoya actually stood her ground calmly. During that short period of coercion, Lillian also discovered something unusual. Although it was only for an instant, Lillian felt as though something in the young man's body was watching her. It was an existence that even she had to pay attention to, which was why she was so wary of Luoya. Arrogance and prejudice can make people careless. Lillian reminded Grimm in response to his evaluation. Her purple eyes stared at the youth's position in the distant image before she added after a moment. Furthermore, he probably already knew about the strangeness of those trees. How ferocious were wolves? In fact, Luoya didn't know much about them in her previous life. Or rather, most wild animals were unfamiliar to humans living in modern cities. Knowing their appearances and races was almost the limit of popular science knowledge. Luoya truly understood these animals in Shiya. To be more specific, it was during the period of acting overlord. The reason was simple. The areas with wolf pack activities needed to be specially marked and avoided as much as possible during construction. Demonic wolves were the nightmares of overlords, far more troublesome than bandits. In fact, Luoya would rather have a level 4 source class monster in her territory than a level 6 source class demonic wolf pack. A level 4 source class monster could be dealt with in less than a month with a level 4 source class elite team. But if these people were to deal with the wolves, Luoya only hoped that they would return in one piece instead of disappearing altogether. However, it was a pity that Luoya had fought with these things as an overlord, but most of the other students' understanding was a little lacking. At this time, in the forest surrounded by giant trees, the chaotic battle had already lasted for more than 10 minutes. The number of students had been greatly reduced. Let go. Damn it. Another student was bitten by a demonic wolf that had died in battle and died in the mouth of the wolf. Before he died, the youth's body disappeared like mist, leaving behind only the guiding spirits to absorb the curse power that flowed out of the dead demonic beasts. These little things only absorbed the demonic beasts killed by their masters. The more they absorbed, the brighter the light became. At this time, the number of wolves and humans on the battlefield had been greatly reduced. Most of the demonic beasts that were still fighting grew from fireflies to lights. A few of them even turned into light bulbs. However, the guiding spirits beside the black-haired youth did not change at all. After another demonic wolf that had taken the initiative to rush over was smashed into meat paste with a bone claw, Luoya, who had been defending and counterattacking, raised his head and silently scanned the surroundings. However, unlike the others who were observing the ground, the black-haired youth was looking at the sky. His golden pupils stared at the towering trees in the vicinity, feeling the gradually increasing concentration of magic in the air. He muttered to himself, "It should be about time." As soon as the youth's voice fell, the forest suddenly began to inexplicably shake. Before the humans and the demonic beasts that were in the midst of fighting could react, a sudden change suddenly befell everyone's head. Roar! In the midst of the hoarse and unpleasant strange roar, the sky and earth shook, and the horn of massacre was blown. Violent fluctuations of curse power suddenly came from the trees that the students were leaning against. Giant malicious faces appeared on the trees, and then the branches of the giant trees condensed. In the blink of an eye, more than 10 gigantic trees fell from the sky and hammered the ground. After a long period of observation, the brightest elves in the field had already been locked onto by these terrifying trance. And under this thunderous attack, the group of students who performed the best was instantly smashed into pieces, tragically annihilated. In the midst of the screams and the sound of flesh and blood exploding, the Trent's mouth curled up strangely, as if they were laughing at the stupidity of the humans. However, what they did not see was that in the corner that they ignored, the black-haired youth's mouth also curled up. Amidst the soundless laughter, the lightning and fire formed by the power of the curse swirled around his body and finally turned into a crimson-red light. An ancient giant shadow appeared in the exploding fog, and at the same time, the meteorite-like fist appeared. Boom! In the midst of the explosion of the trees, Luo Ya's silent guiding spirit light began to rapidly expand, and under the light, the black-haired youth looked up at the dull trance and revealed a smile. "Stop pretending. I'll lay my cards on the table." Chapter 251. Oh! In the arena, as the Goulandaire smashed the tree with his meteorite, the audience cheered enthusiastically, attracting more and more people's attention. The great tree forest was a pain that most of the students in St. Freya Academy couldn't forget. Many senior students would gnash their teeth at the mention of this place. Compared to its plain name, people preferred to describe it as the Nightmare Forest because it was full of malice. When the students entered the forest, the entire forest seemed peaceful, but in fact, the first batch of monsters had already arrived. They were the evil Tyrants that disguised themselves as trees nearby. What was more infuriating was that these Tyrants didn't attack immediately, but instead, they would scout. They would drive packs of wolves to battle with the students, and through their performance in battle, they would lock onto the stronger students in advance and launch a saturation attack in the second half of the battle. As the saying went, a man proposes, but a tree disposes. In other secret realms, the more courageous the students were, the more they would reap. But in the great tree forest, the better they performed, the faster they would die. It was completely against human design. After the human leader was struck by lightning, the remaining students would be powerless even if they banded together. That was why in the great tree forest, they would basically be wiped out every time. However, what was unexpected was that this year, human intelligence had once again occupied the high ground. What was more exciting was the young man who saw through the treacherous plan and the terrifying skeletal giant. The instant the skeletal giant broke the giant tree, everyone's gaze changed. He can win. He might even win. Go. Avenge us. The cheers from the audience continued. Above the crowd, Grimm's face had turned as green as a ring. Being humiliated in front of Lillian made this young ring-bearer feel terrible. But at this moment, Her Royal Highness had no time to care about him. That is, staring at the Goulandaire's body, Lillian's emotionless face revealed a rare expression. Her purple eyes widened, and she couldn't help but stand up. But Lillian's shock wasn't only for the Goulandaire. After all, she had sensed the strange presence before and had guessed it. She was truly shocked by the way the black-haired young man's curse power manifested. This is the creation type? Like me? The black-haired girl couldn't hide the surprise in her heart. As the Goulandaire's actions became more and more certain of her judgment, questions began to appear in her heart one after another. Could this be the reason why Lucas forbade her from touching Luo Ya? Or was it just a coincidence? Although the information about Luo Ya's extraordinary ability was mostly blank, his father, Ka Dia, was clear. He was not a creation type, and the forbidden contact with the Akhat family also included Ka Dia, so it had nothing to do with this? While Lillian was speculating all sorts of possibilities in her mind, on the other side, Luo Ya was going all out. Trance. To the people of this era, this was probably a race that no one knew anything about. However, Luo Ya was very familiar with them. After all, there was one planted in his house. During the days when he was transporting Cade, Luo Ya had chatted with him many times. Just like the holy beasts, the Trance were divided into two types. The Trance who possessed the origin substance were intelligent and kind, while the Trance who didn't possess the origin substance were evil and cunning. Moreover, they were extremely thick and liked to incite the creatures around them to kill and absorb their flesh and blood. They would also ambush the strong in battle and put on a show of wanting to take them all. Not long after entering this place, Luo Ya discovered a large number of skeletons under the roots of the nearby trees. The familiar feeling of curse power made him certain that there were Trance nearby, but he couldn't tell how many of them there were. Now that the enemy had jumped out, Luo Ya could finally show his skills. In the year since Luo Ya reached level 4 of source rank, he didn't have many opportunities to use his full strength. Now that enemies were everywhere, and the screams of the freshmen were endless, Luo Ya, who was wrapped in curse power, no longer had any worries. The Gulander attacked again in the shockwave of magic essence. Unlike the cautious Luoya, the Traiants were obviously careless. They thought that victory was already decided and didn't pull out the roots that were used as their legs. The immobile Traiants were the targets, and the punching giant was the giant. The moment this combination met, the outcome was basically decided. Boom! Another loud explosion resounded through the forest. The cursed power on the white-boned fist of the Gulander burned like fire, and when he waved it, it was as if his body was accompanied by wind and thunder. The huge body of the level 4 source rank Tyrant was just a slightly thicker cardboard in his eyes. The moment his fist touched the tree, it was like a bullet piercing through it, followed by the explosion of countless wood shavings. But even if they were weak, the Traiants didn't give up resisting. Their huge branches waved, and there were countless air-piercing sounds in the forest every second. A large number of evil Traiants wanted to entangle the giant's body. Their roots broke out of the ground one after another, looking for a chance to counterattack. The battle between the giants and the Traiants began. The forest of giant trees shook as the two sides fought. The surviving students looked up at the battle above their heads and trembled. This scene was like a myth, and it was obviously beyond their understanding of the opening ceremony. In the arena outside the secret realm, the atmosphere had reached its climax. This boxing match, like live broadcast, stirred up the emotions of everyone present. Every time the Gulander knocked down a Tyrant, it was a celebratory cheer. Everyone, the name of the new student has been found. Luoya caught. Let us send encouragement to the warrior who punishes the evil Traiants. Oh, Luoya, Luoya, Luoya. The host of the publicity department worked overtime at the last minute and shouted loudly. What followed was a tsunami of responses. The hot-blooded youths who imitated the movements of the Gulander raised their arms high, and the number of students shouting Luoya's name increased. Hurry up and change the odds. Hurry up and change the odds. Looking at the screen, the banker's face turned ashen. The odds for Roja Akate in the list of candidates began to drop rapidly, but even so, there was still an endless stream of people buying. The students raised their gold coins and placed their bets, boldly spending a lot of money. Spells and fireworks rose into the sky to liven things up, and the gorgeous light illuminated the faces of many teachers and students above the audience. On the rooftop, Chris laughed loudly, holding a cigarette and waving his fist. Chapter 252. What was the most important thing in a one-on-one duel? Equipment and tactics were undoubtedly very important, but if Luoya had to choose one of the many conditions, then he would choose attributes. It was not the wind, fire, and thunder attributes that restrained the attributes. The world of Shiya was real, not a game. The extraordinaires had a variety of curses, and as the degree of mutation deepened, more or less there would be a physical bonus. Their battles with each other were not just about making fireballs, but often ever-changing. There was no such thing as a weak extraordinaire. Even the group of semi-disabled people from the puppet school who couldn't move by themselves were more than enough to fight a tiger empty-handed. Luoya's attribute restraint was more inclined to the restraint of position, such as the current situation. Boom! A huge roar echoed in the open space in the woods. The fist of the huge skeleton collided with the lance and rolled up a whirlwind. The broken leaves and branches rushed into the sky, but before they fell to the ground, they were once again swept up by the shock wave. The black-haired boy stood on the ground at this time, looking at the armor on the opposite side. He couldn't see the specific appearance, but it was obviously a knight's extraordinaire phantom. He was uninterested and didn't even bother to move. Roderick Osborne. This was the armored man that Luoya saw through the skill, the former ring-bearer phantom. There was no doubt that Luoya's luck was relatively good. He met a strength-type ring-bearer, and to some extent, this type of physical attack was what he was best at dealing with. The fierce confrontation shook the forest, and the earth on the ground began to shatter and disintegrate. After dozens of rounds, the huge skeleton and the knight were evenly matched. Luoya observed the other side and carefully analyzed for a long time. He had almost evaluated the strength of the other side. The battle of extraordinaires wasn't about piling up attributes. If curses were weapons and curses were bullets, then the most important thing was undoubtedly the person who used the weapon. If the person was stupid, everything else was in vain. Perhaps he found that he couldn't defeat Luo Ya under the protection of the Goulandaire. The tall knight pointed his lance forward, and destructive curses began to gather. It wasn't until this moment that the black-haired boy's golden pupils suddenly shrank, and at the same time, his face suddenly became strange. Should I say that those who can become ring-bearers have some ability? Hee, interesting. Luo Ya muttered to himself, and Goulandaire beside him also agreed. The black-haired teenager stared at the heavily armored man opposite him, and his heart was in turmoil. You're dressed like this, and you're actually playing a game? That's right. Although Luo Ya didn't know which era Roderick was a ring-bearer, or his specific identity and background, there was one thing that Luo Ya was sure of, and that was his character. This was a cunning old fox. The heavy armor, the lance, and the tall physique were all feints. The speed at which the power of a large-scale spell was extracted was an important factor in determining whether a supernatural individual was more inclined towards spells or physical abilities. This ring-bearer named Roderick had obviously undergone long-term training in this area. Perhaps even Luo Ya wouldn't be as efficient as him. This person's true identity should be a cursemancer of the Energy School. The Energy School was one of the oldest schools of thought. It emphasized on following the most basic destructive nature of each person's curse power, reducing the consumption of conversion and pursuing the greatest power. To put it bluntly, it was the light cannon style. Condense and blast out. If there was no conversion, then there was no consumption. It was normal to be blasted to death, but if there wasn't enough power to blast to death, then it was normal. Of course, when it came to practical application, the Energy faction had many secret manuals, and it was far from being as simple as one would imagine. For example, the famous technique, Hidden Collection, was an ultimate move that could be used to silently store up the curse power in the middle of a battle and suddenly release it. After all, it was impossible for other factions to secretly store up a big move while fighting. This person's physical ability should be brought about by his bloodline. Yes, a strengthening type bloodline user, and a rather powerful one at that. Goulandaire gave a rare compliment. The next moment, the light of destruction suddenly erupted, and the beam of curse power broke through the distance of hundreds of meters with a rumbling sound. In the midst of the explosion, there was a loud explosion in the direction of the forest where Luo Ya was. In the scattered white light, the knight's movements stopped for a moment, but the next moment, he suddenly raised his head and looked up. Above the dim night sky, a golden light was shining in the starless sky. It crossed the sky and kept rising, moving directly above Roderick. It was the black-haired boy with irregular light wings on his back. Angel's Gift. This was one of the abilities that Luo Ya and Nuo Iyer hatched together through the short blade of the Holy One a few years ago. It had the effect of dispelling negative statuses. Luo Ya often used it to neutralize the immortal state caused by summoning the Goulandaire, but the other flying ability was rarely used. The whistling sound of the wind was ringing in his ears, and the rapidly falling temperature made Luo Ya's body feel slightly cold. The boy who slowed down looked back at the sky. At this time, Roderick's body had turned into a small dot. Luo Ya saw this and smiled slightly. The golden light around his body disappeared, and he turned into a red killing star. It's about time. I've been wanting to play like this for a long time. The boy chuckled. His body was pulled down by gravity, and at the same time, the blood-red light on his body extended and turned into a huge demon god. The mist was blown away by the wind, and the falling giant skeleton made a sound as it rubbed against the air. The red star turned into a meteor and fell from the sky. Under the huge shadow, Roderick's body moved again. He raised the light cannon on his lance again, but this time, the light beam could no longer threaten Luo Ya. The white bone fist was getting bigger and bigger in Roderick's vision. The explosive curse power and the huge potential energy shattered the golden light beam from the sky. Chapter 253. In the fog, the black-haired boy stared at the blood-red name that suddenly changed the environment. Although he couldn't see the person clearly due to the fog, just the name alone was enough to cause a huge impact on Luoya. Roy Akkad. This was an unforgettable name for the Akkad family. It represented one of the most prosperous periods of the family. Vincent's era was too far away from the present. In the past few hundred years, the Akkad family leaders had tied the glory of the family to Roy, the chosen one. Luoya could be said to have grown up listening to Roy's stories since he was a child. Luoya, who understood Roy's journey, naturally knew that this ancestor had also studied at St. Freya Academy. However, there were no records of the specific situation in the Akkad family. As for encountering such a thing during the opening ceremony, Luoya thought about it before, but he didn't care. There was no other reason other than the probability was too low. St. Freya Academy had been established for more than 900 years, and the number of ring-bearers was estimated to be more than 1,000. The possibility of encountering a family member was negligible, and it was still unclear whether Roy was a ring-bearer or not. From a certain point of view, Luoya's thoughts were correct. He didn't encounter Roy through the normal channels, but it was obvious that the current situation was abnormal. The return after defeating the ring-bearer didn't trigger, but instead seamlessly connected to the hills and plains. Recently, there were strange fluctuations in the mysterious realm. Chris's words echoed in the boy's mind, and Luoya immediately became alert. The mysterious realm only had one effect on the Night of the Devil, and that was to nullify death and injury. Then, after the fluctuations, would this function still exist? Luoya didn't know the answer to this question, and he didn't want to use his life to verify it. He stared at the blood-red light that represented the killing intent, and almost reflexively, the curse power exploded. Sensing the threat from the outside world, the Goulandair and Paytila had already made their move. This feeling, it's also the crown? Little guy, get behind me. A hoarse and dignified voice and an anxious female voice came one after another. Goulandair's huge body appeared at the forefront, and the giant snake made of rocks used its body to encircle the youth. The two ancient gods looked forward at the same time, and under everyone's gaze, the fog that covered the figures finally dissipated slowly. Under the fog, a young man with long black hair appeared. He was tall and slender, wearing an old-fashioned suit from a few hundred years ago. He wore boots, and there were a few medals of honor pinned on his chest. His long cape and black hair fluttered in the breeze, and his golden eyes shone like stars, adding a layer of dignity to his slightly weak face. The constantly changing image in front of him was the data, and the youth naturally began to watch it. It was a short but long story that belonged to the youth alone. The realization of his own fate, the pursuit of the cultists, the mountains of corpses on the streets of the holy capital, the blood on the deck of the ocean, the destructive disasters and unknown enemies and difficulties appeared one after another, as if there was no end to them. Looking at the busy youth, Luoya could not help but think this should be enough, right? How long more do I have to work hard? It's almost time to rest. Chapter 254. On the hill, Roha Akat's golden pupils stared at the shadow of his ancestor from hundreds of years ago silently. After the fatal genjutsu was broken, Roy's genjutsu no longer had any effect on him, and the boy's return ceremony officially began. Frozen Earth. Amidst the majestic voice, the curse power in Luoya's body exploded into the sky along with the wave of frost. The majestic life force began to transform into a booster at the critical moment, causing his strength to rise steadily. In an instant, he had reached the peak of Source Level 3. When Luoya broke free from the illusion and found that he was still on the plains and hills, he understood that this was no longer the gentle and refined demon Encounter Night, but an unknown place where one would truly fall into death. Therefore, the young man did not hold back at all. At the same time, two huge figures wrapped in curse power appeared angrily. The roaring giant swung his fist the moment he appeared, and the eyes of Mother Earth emitted a fatal light as she stared at the enemy. The meteorite-like fist fell from the sky, and the legs that touched the ground were quickly petrified. In addition to the pincer attack, there was also the frost that seemed to freeze the world. All the attacks arrived at the same time, and the situation Roy was facing could be described as hopeless. However, despite having such an obvious advantage, Luo Yu's expression did not show the slightest carelessness or relaxation. It was only because of the Akhat family's bloodline that he never fought alone. Amidst the buzzing sound of the air vibrating, thousands of rays of light suddenly rushed out of Roy's body. The petrification effect of Paitila disappeared in the light. As the light wings spread out, holy and majestic energy soared into the sky with a tall figure. When Luoya saw the figure, his gaze instantly turned solemn. An angel, not a person with an angel bloodline like Nua Iyer, but a real angel who served Shia in ancient times. The light that went against the flow rushed toward the fist of the Gulen Daer, but that was not all. After the angel, a deep beast roar sounded. Roar! Amidst the howls that shook the surroundings, a giant wolf that looked like a phantom appeared out of thin air. His body seemed to be weightless as he floated out and landed on the ground before turning into a solid form. The phantom wolf ran towards Mother Earth, and behind it, the long-haired youth's body was already wrapped in bright flames, creating a huge conflict with the surrounding cold air. On the dusky ground, the roars of beasts mixed with ice and fire could be heard. The giants and angels were wrestling, and the flames of war were everywhere. The deathmatch in the Mystic Realm was still going on, but outside the Mystic Realm, it was a peaceful scene. The students who participated in the preliminaries were eliminated one by one due to their defeats. They were led out of the misty forest by the guide sprites. Some people were dejected as they looked at the guide sprites that were not as bright as the lights, while others were in high spirits as they looked at the sprites that were much brighter. Regardless of whether the results were ideal or not, the admission ceremony that belonged to them was over. The teachers and senior students began to record the results of the freshmen separately, while more people were silently waiting for this year's finals to enter and face the shadow of the Sentinel. Everyone was curious as to how many geniuses would be able to survive in the new year. However, in the Mystic Realm monitoring room, the teacher's attention was attracted by something else. The wave value is rising. It's still rising. It's going to break through the second warning line. Damn it. What the hell is going on this year? What the hell is going on? The roars of the monitors echoed in the room, and the entire monitoring room was in chaos. It was hard to believe that just 10 minutes ago, they were still drinking tea and chatting. The Mystic Realm monitoring room was a department in the Academy that was specifically responsible for monitoring the stability of the Mystic Realm, such as the Night of the Demons, ensuring the safety of the Mystic Realm, and assessing the danger level. For many years, the team had completed their tasks well and had rich experience. However, today, an unprecedented emergency suddenly struck. The Mystic Realm, which should not have caused much fluctuation according to the combat standards of the freshmen, shook violently in an extremely short period of time. At first, the monitors did not think much of it and only sighed at the strength of this year's freshmen. However, the moment the wave value broke through the first warning line and did not turn back, everyone's expression changed. The last time the wave value broke through the first warning line was not too long ago. It was just 2 years ago, when the Purple Rose Lily's battle caused a violent tremor on the Night of the Demons. However, even the fluctuations caused by Her Highness the Empress battle only caused the wave value to break through the first warning line for a few seconds. But now, the wave value was rising steadily. It's already broken through the second warning line. It's still rising. It's still rising. This wave is not something a student can cause. If this continues, the Mystic Realm will explode. Roars and shouts echoed in the room, and everyone's brain nerves were oppressed to the point of dizziness. The stability of the Mystic Realm was related to the special effect of the Night of the Demons. Once it completely collapsed, the freshmen who were challenging the Guardians would lose their lives and become invalid. And now, the students who were challenging the Guardians were the Princess of St. Maester and the daughter of the President of St. Louis. If anything happened to them, quickly inform the emergency department. No. The monitoring room director, whose face was as pale as paper, trembled as he thought of this. He slammed the table and gritted his teeth as he shouted, "Activate the Level 1 emergency alert. Go directly to the Dean." Chapter 255. What was the most important thing in a battle? Was it hot-bloodedness? Was it bravery? Was it perseverance? No, neither was it. Luoya felt that the most important thing in a battle between transcendence was calmness. The timing of the attack, the degree of power needed, the target's trump card, and the possible price to bear. Everything needed to be measured in advance. From all these perspectives, Royakat, the ancestor from hundreds of years ago, was the most powerful opponent Luoya had encountered so far. Since awakening his bloodline, Luoya had never felt that he could lose to someone of the same level, but there was no doubt that Roy was an exception. The two of them had their own advantages in different fields. Unlike Luoya, who had spent his life to reach Source Level 3, the beautiful ancestor in front of him was a true Source Level 3. His understanding of his curses and bloodline was also at Source Level 3, and his application was far stronger than Luoya's. The evidence was the golden crown fragment that strengthened the ancient gods, which was a skill that Luoya had yet to master. But in comparison, Luoya also had his own advantages, and that was the strength of the Gulandair and Paitila. Whether it was the king of giants or the Earth Mother, their strength was obviously higher than that of the ancient gods opposite them. Even after being strengthened by Roy, the two sides were only evenly matched, so the outcome of this battle was destined to be Luoya's side from the beginning. The black-haired boy stared at the ancestor, who looked even more beautiful under the reflection of the flames. That delicate beauty made it difficult to distinguish between a man and a woman in the night, and it had a unique, neutral temperament. Unfortunately, Luoya did not have time to appreciate the ancestor's magnificent beauty now, so he focused his gaze on the raging flames on his shoulder. The moment the boy saw the flames attached to Luoya's body, he understood that the ancestor in front of him actually had 3 ancient gods following him, but the third one had not fully appeared yet. Instead, he cooperated with him to use the flames to fight Luoya. There was no doubt that this was abnormal. The full combat strength of the ancient gods was worlds apart from the current half-baked situation. In fact, these flames could not completely offset the frost of the frozen soil maker. In the previous intense collision, Luoya had turned the other party into an ice sculpture more than once, but every time he killed Roy, he would be reborn like the mystic wolf in the sky. Immortal body. When this phrase appeared in Luoya's mind, he was close to despair, but soon reason prevailed. There was no such thing as immortality in this world. This kind of power that defied common sense must be accompanied by harsh conditions and costs. This was Shiya's iron law. There must be something that he had overlooked, and that was the key to victory. With that in mind, the black-haired young man carried out a large number of experiments. After defeating his opponent several times, he had a complete train of thought. Why is Roy willing to take a beating and not release this ancient god of fire? If it is to resist Luoya's frost, it is completely putting the cart before the horse. According to the nature of this resurrection, there is no doubt that it comes from the ability of that phantom beast. So what is the use of this flame? Stretching out his palm to release the frost to block the huge flame fist, Luoya looked at the ancestor below again, and a flash of realization appeared in his eyes. It's the shadow. The role of the flame is just a cover. What Roy really needs is a light source. This is the condition for his infinite resurrection and the reason why he did not let the ancient god of fire appear and leave. Countdown to skill. 19, 18, 17. There's only one strike left. Feeling his vitality, the black-haired boy muttered to himself. After more than 10 seconds, Luoya would fall back to level 4 of the source rank and enter an extremely weak state. At that time, even with the protection of 2 ancient gods, he would almost certainly die. The only way to survive is to win. Luoya's golden eyes lit up as if they were ignited at this moment. In the silent silence, the most powerful attack so far arrived in this secret realm. When he stretched out his hands, the entire space seemed to be controlled by the gods. It quickly became hazy in the vibrations, and the collision of the frost and the air created a white mist that spread like an explosion and then circled around the two of them. The white mist above the plane was like a tornado, and the huge momentum and terrifying spell fluctuations attracted the attention of all the gods. The angel in the sky stopped the entanglement of the spell, and the phantom beast landed on the ground again. The Mother Earth straightened up and looked anxiously, and the huge skeleton could not help but turn its head. All the strong people present understood that the real battle was about to decide the winner. Under the cover of frost, the black-haired boy's hands faced each other, and the waves of disaster converged into a frost-like heart in his palm. Heart of Frozen Earth. This was the product of Luo Yu's year of using the attributes of the Frozen Earth creator's crown stone to the extreme. The resplendent heart was like a work of art, but the small creation represented the eternal frozen earth calamity. The moment it appeared, Roy, who was wrapped in flames, suddenly stopped. The shadow person looked down at his chest with a stiff expression. In front of him, Luo Yu's palm also grasped the light, and then suddenly clenched it. Chapter 256. On the plain, two youths who looked somewhat similar fell to each other, and in the distance, the ancient gods fighting collapsed and left one after another. Holding the saint's dagger in his hand, the black-haired youth was covered in wounds, but there was a faint smile on his face. It had to be said that although his injuries were miserable, Luo Yu was in a good mood and even had a unique sense of accomplishment. When Luo Yu started this round of attacks, there were only 10 seconds left before the end of the skill. At that time, there were still two possibilities for Roy's immortal body because theoretically, there were two ways to eliminate the shadow. One of them was naturally to completely extinguish the light source. As everyone in this world knew, there would be no shadow without light. The other was a concept that did not exist in Shiya. There would be light without shadow. If it was the first situation, then Luo Yu had many ways to restrain the other party, such as blocking the moonlight with a thick fog. But after thinking about it, Luo Yu felt that the possibility of using this method to break the immortal body of the ancestor was not high. There was no other reason. It was too simple. As a hero of a generation hundreds of years ago, how could Roy's life-saving skills be so simple? If it could be broken so easily, then Luo Yu felt that it would not be as useful as his weakened immortality. Therefore, Luo Yu was prepared for the second situation when he attacked, and the second requirement of completely erasing the other party's shadow was indeed much more difficult than the first. How could a person eliminate a shadow? There were probably not many people in Shiya who could give a perfect answer to this question. Even though there were many uses for shadows and curses, there were none that could eliminate shadows because shadows did not have the nature of curses. However, Shiya did not have any research in this area, but Luo Yu had something in his previous life that could roughly do it. The shadowless lamp was an important invention of the medical field in Luo Yu's previous life. It was mainly used in surgery. The principle was to reduce the umbra by using many light sources. It was not truly shadowless, but it was enough. Although Roy's skills were powerful, just like the laws of this world, powerful skills had harsh activation conditions. And facts proved that Roy's immortal body could not be activated with the invisible shadow under the dense light. After the initial death illusion, the competition between the ancient gods, and the personal battle, Luo Yu finally won and defeated Roy, who was at the source level higher than him. Even if this Roy was a fake without enough intelligence, this was enough to make him proud. The real Roy would probably hide the secret of immortality better and conduct a certain degree of verbal interference and inducement. TSK, what a monster. Chapter 257. On the plain, the black-haired boy looked at the old ancestor who was patting his shoulder and fell into silence with a stiff expression. The wind was blowing, and the grass was flying. The wound on Roy's chest was bleeding, and Luo Yu was looking at his bright red lips, thinking about a question. How can you use such a cute face to say such dirty words? Ancestor, what did you say? I said to make a woman from the Aikman family pregnant. Okay, don't say any more. Luo Yu stretched out her hand to stop Roy's next words. She pinched her eyebrows, feeling a headache. Didn't you leave a message on Kate saying, don't trust Aikman? Indeed, I have the same idea now. But what does impregnating an Aikman woman have to do with trusting their family? Of course it has something to do with it. Luo Yu glared at the calm Roy, her face red and speechless. Impregnating her? Isn't that the same as getting married? If you don't even trust her, how can you get to that point? You don't have to get married. Cough, cough. I mean, you have to think about it yourself. Roy hurriedly changed his words under the gaze of his descendant. For a moment, he felt a headache coming on as he looked at Luoya. Obviously, this descendant of the Akate family was better educated, had a higher moral standard, and had a higher sense of responsibility. He probably wouldn't impregnate someone without giving her a proper status. Roy was actually quite satisfied with this. After all, good moral character was the foundation of everything, especially as an awakened of the Akate family. Having a dirty heart was equivalent to giving enemies a chance to attack, and sooner or later, he would die an unnatural death. However, although having a good moral character was good, it was a disadvantage for the mission Roy gave him. Observing Luo Ya's blushing face, Roy couldn't help but shake his head slightly in his heart. Looking at this shy look, he probably hasn't even held a girl's hand before. Roy looked at Luo Ya, who was snatched by the girls every day, and his heart was filled with worry about the Akate family having no descendants. However, what he did not know was that Luo Ya did not hold hands much because he was usually the one being held. Looking at this youth who didn't reveal anything and didn't take the initiative to attack, old ancestor Roy felt a headache coming on. Without a doubt, as a member of the Austin Empire's royal family who believed in the pureblood theory, it was unlikely that the women of the Ackerman family would have a good impression of the men of the Akate family. They might even be on guard against them. If Luoya was a veteran in the field of love, it would be fine. But he was so inexperienced. How could he? Roy, who couldn't think of a good solution after thinking for a long time, was extremely anxious. In the end, he couldn't help but grit his teeth and stare at Luoya. I don't care what method you use. I just want you to have a child with Aceman's blood. If you can't get it, then I'll just snatch it away. Roy, who had given up on his plan, was rather helpless. He didn't think that Luoya would work through normal means, but fighting was a different matter. In his eyes, Luoya couldn't pick up girls, but fighting was very good. As the saying went, use one's strength to attack the other's weakness. If he couldn't get it through normal means, then he could only snatch it away. As long as he succeeded, the Ackerman family, who was thousands of miles away, could only suffer in silence unless they went to war with the theocracy. Of course, the Akate family wouldn't be able to leave the country in the future. This matter didn't require any precise emotional manipulation. The only difficulty was whether he could successfully snatch it away. Roy was very confident in Luoya on this point. She was just a woman from the Ackerman family. How strong could she be? Roy grinned and scoffed at the Ackerman family's combat strength. However, he didn't see Luoya's dull expression when she heard his good idea. Snatch Lilith Ackerman to be the wife of the fort? Heh, you're really a clever little devil. Luoya looked at her ancestor, who had an expression that said, this isn't difficult at all. She really wanted to ask him, ancestor, why do you want to end your line? Lillian Ackerman was a genius who had reached third source level at the age of 16. If Luoya remembered correctly, Roy had also reached third source level at the age of 16. Most importantly, unlike the previous retarded version of her ancestor, Lillian had an extremely high IQ. If Luoya really used her skills to fight with her, there were basically only two possibilities. Lillian killed Luoya, or he accidentally killed Lillian. The two possibilities were equally likely. There was no other way. Based on the strength that Lillian had displayed previously, Luoya would die if he held back. However, if she used her full strength, all of Luoya's moves were basically killing moves that couldn't be saved. After hesitating for a long time, Luoya still didn't tell Roy that this woman of the Ackerman family was a peerless genius. Instead, she asked another core question, which was why Roy wanted Luoya to marry a woman from the Ackerman family. However, she didn't expect Roy to shake his head at this question. Chapter 258. Is he gone? On the plains, the young man who was gradually recovering held the ring in his hand and looked at the light spots floating in the sky. For a moment, there was an indescribable sadness in his heart. Although he knew that Roy was no longer in this world, leaving only a trace of his consciousness, and the two did not talk for a long time. The closeness that originated from their bloodline, the same goal, and the same purpose made him identify with Roy, and Roy did not hide his kindness to him. In the end, Akot still had too few blood relatives. He was alone in almost every era, not to mention that Roy was also an awakened, a blood relative that transcended generations. It had to be said that Roy's prodigal personality that did not match his heart left a deep impression on him, but Luoya could clearly feel the sense of responsibility under that frivolity. His appearance provided Luoya with a lot of clues that could no longer be found in this era, and the help he provided was indescribable. From Vincent to Roy, and then to Luoya, the three awakened bloodline of the Akot family were like a relay, peeling off the historical truth layer by layer, eager to find the truth, change the current situation of the family and their own fate, and even seek the stability of the human community. Perhaps Vincent and Roy did pay the price with their lives in this process, but their efforts were not in vain. Luoya, who inherited the information left by the two ancestors, would continue to explore. Perhaps one day he would also encounter a desperate situation, but even so, he was not willing to give up. The result of 1,000 years of accumulation could not be destroyed in his hands. This was Luoya's will, and also his thought when he received the Black Rose Ring. All the side effects in his body disappeared, and the spell power that was consumed by the explosion was replenished as if time had reversed. Even his torn clothes gradually recovered. This surreal scene made Luoya realize the magic of the Night of the Demon again. But then again, Roy actually used his own shadow to protect the ring. Didn't this mean that he did not want to give it to anyone? How could a freshman deal with such a pervert like him? Or was this a screening mechanism, and only the awakened bloodline of the Akot family who defeated his shadow would be able to make him hand over this important clue about the scholar, with peace of mind? If that was the case, then his ancestor must have cheated in order to keep the ring a secret. Luoya looked at the two rings in his hand and secretly guessed. Soon after, he shook his head. No matter what, it was more important to get out of here as soon as possible. Thinking of this, the young man called out to the guiding spirit in the sky. When he realized that the fatty couldn't find his way for a while, he sighed helplessly and reached into his pocket to light Chris's lamp oil. Then, he followed the guidance and walked out. At the edge of the dense fog forest, chaos had just ended. A large number of elites from the emergency department were evacuating in batches. Dean Antonio was also observing the situation nearby. Chris stood on the rooftop and looked in the direction of the forest. He heaved a sigh of relief and prayed that Luoya would be fine. Everything happened after the preliminaries. When the freshmen were challenging the shadow of the Guardian, the Demon Knight suddenly began to fluctuate violently. At one point, it was close to the final warning line and was about to collapse. In the face of such an emergency situation, the Secret Territories Monitoring Room activated a Level 1 alert. The school's emergency department was dispatched in full force, ready to rush in and save the freshmen. One must know that the challengers now were not the ordinary aristocrats of the past. They were the Nuwa Iyer princess of the theocracy and Miss Seraphia Rose. If something really happened, the implications and the depth of the impact would be unimaginable. In fact, the atmosphere at the scene was extremely solemn. The old director of the monitoring room had a heart attack on the spot and was directly carried away by the school doctor. Fortunately, this violent fluctuation only lasted for a short while before it disappeared. Dean Antonio seemed to have grasped some inside information and did not seem to be worried about it. After the secret realm stabilized, everyone's nervousness gradually dissipated, and the Night of the Demons once again returned to its original trajectory. At this time, in the periphery of the misty forest, there were thousands of freshmen and seniors who had just come out. They were waiting for the results of this year's competition, or rather, for the birth of a new ring-bearer. Among them were the nobles of the theocracy and Rose, freshmen who were waiting to ride on someone's coattails, seniors who were not doing well, and even a large number of gamblers who were waiting for the lottery to open. The opening ceremony this time could be said to be the gathering of expectations from all sides. Not only were the theocracy and Rose waiting for their leaders, but the freshmen were also looking forward to the birth of a new force. After all, St. Freya Academy currently had a ring-bearer in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th years. Ideally, the freshmen would have a ring bearer as well. Otherwise, it would be difficult for the freshmen. The ring bearer's exclusive training ground and exclusive buildings were all shared by the faction. This was a substantial benefit, and there were countless hidden benefits such as connections within the faction. If the first years did not have a ring bearer, then they could only compete with the second years for the Green Roses quota. It would be much more difficult to compete with the seniors for a job. Time passed by as everyone waited in anticipation. Chapter 259. When the brighter guide spirit rushed out of the forest, the senior students who had witnessed the entrance ceremony several times almost reflexively cheered. The guide spirit was not only a guide, but also a tool to score points in this mysterious realm. The brighter the guide spirit was, the more curse power it absorbed, which indirectly meant that it defeated more and more powerful enemies. Now, the light of the guiding spirit that floated out of the forest had expanded to the point where an adult could barely fit it. This was something that the previous guiding spirit that was only the size of a basketball could not compare to. And this level of light also represented the birth of a new ring bearer. With the crowd's excited gazes, the silhouette of a person walking out of the dense fog forest gradually became clear. Not long after, a young girl with reddish-brown hair and emerald eyes strolled out under the gazes of tens of thousands of people. Then, a burst of exclamation resounded from the crowd. It's Miss. It's the girl from Ratchet's side. As the crowd clamored, Xia Luot walked out of the misty forest with a smile. Her beautiful eyes quickly scanned the crowd, and when she found that Luoya was not present, she sighed in disappointment. After the fierce battle, the girl hoped to see the appearance of her sweetheart welcoming her. In fact, Xia Luot had already thought about it. If Luoya was here to wait for her, she would let Luoya put the ring on her finger. Although Xia was not like Luoya's previous life, where different fingers had different meanings, just putting a ring on a lady's finger was enough to show the intimacy between the two, just like the ancient practice of giving daggers to each other. Generally speaking, this kind of behavior would only happen between lovers. But man proposes, God disposes. Xia Luot did not expect that her sweetheart, who she thought would quickly defeat the shadow of the sentinel, would come out later than her. Maybe he met someone difficult to deal with. The reddish-brown-haired girl thought and sighed. St. Freya Academy had produced many talents for thousands of years, and it was normal for there to be a few ring-bearers who could fight or who were good at delaying battles. What's more, they were all fighting above their level, so it was understandable that they would come out later. Of course, Xia Luot also had another acquaintance who did not come out, such as a certain Miss Angel, but it was obvious that the reddish-brown-haired girl did not want to see her at all. Shaking her head slightly to get rid of the disappointment in her heart, Xia Luot raised her hand in front of the crowd, and the curse power flowed into the ring in her fingers. The next moment, a sparkling red light bloomed in the exquisite rose-shaped ring, followed by the crowd's cheers and thunderous applause. It's the red rose. We have the red rose. Oh, long live the miss. As Xia Luot showed off her rose ring, the crowd below was completely immersed in excitement. The nobles on the rose side cheered, and the freshmen breathed a sigh of relief. The teaching staff talked with each other, admiring the talent of the Sorofia family's Mississippi. Although the Sorofia family had been famous for a long time, because their main talents were focused on divination and astrology, and because the family's inheritance was cut off, the Sorofia family had only produced one ring-bearer in 100 years, and Xia Luot was the second. It could be said that she had won glory for the whole family and made the Rose nobles proud. The cheers at the scene continued, and Xia Luot was surrounded by people. All the freshmen wanted to leave an impression on this ring-bearer of the same level, especially the seniors who failed to achieve their goals. However, before this wave of cheers subsided, a new guide sprite rushed out of the forest, causing a second round of exclamations in the crowd. That's a new guide sprite. Someone else came out? This one is even brighter. The noise and discussion exploded when the second guide sprite appeared. There was no doubt that this guide sprite with a brighter light could only mean one thing, and that was that another freshman had successfully defeated the ring-bearer's shadow and obtained the ring. Under the expectant gaze of the crowd, the blonde Miss Angel successfully appeared. The light in the fog became brighter and brighter, and in the next moment, Nuwa Ire, with a pair of wings of light behind her, flew out of the forest and soared into the sky. Amidst the exclamations of the crowd, she slowly floated down with the guide sprite. At the same time, she stretched out her hand and showed the rose ring on her finger, which was emitting a golden light, to the crowd. The golden rose. Another ring-bearer. She or above. Long live the princess. Another round of applause rang out. The students of St. Mestre in the academy shouted and waved the national flag, while the students of the Austin Empire were more indifferent. Overall, the freshmen were still in high spirits, and the entire forest was filled with a celebratory atmosphere that was different from the gloomy fog. Nuwa Ire also frowned as she did not see Luoya during the process of landing. She looked at Xia Luot, who was surrounded by people on the other side. When she saw the red rose ring on her finger, her gaze became slightly vigilant. In the end, she still got it. But forget it, it was expected. The blonde girl withdrew her gaze. Now that they had obtained the ring, Nuwa Ire and Xia Luot, as the future successors of their respective countries, should not quarrel with each other. Instead, they should communicate with the students of their own countries and accept their congratulations. It was necessary to communicate with subordinates and use honor to enhance the cohesion of the team. This was something that the leaders of a group had to do. However, now that they were carrying out their duties, they had to divert some of their attention to silently observe the situation in the forest, waiting for the person of their dreams to appear. Others might not be familiar with Luoya, but Nuwa Ire and Xia Luot had experienced the historical journey with him. They were fully aware of Luoya's combat strength. The Guardian Shadow was only a weakened version of the Source Tier 3. It was not a threat at all. The two victors were full of confidence in the young man, but on the other side, Chris was a little anxious. She could not help but light up another cigarette. As an old single woman who had not spoken to her seniors for more than 10 years, Chris had been holding back for the entire afternoon, but she still could not think of what to say to Kadia. After careful consideration, she realized that the only thing that they had in common was Luoya, and Luoya's entrance exam was no doubt a good place to start. Chapter 260. In the square outside the forest, the crowd had already fallen into a frenzy. 3 ring-bearers. This was the highest number of ring-bearers in the same batch in the history of St. Freya Academy. The last time 3 ring-bearers appeared in the same batch was more than 100 years ago. In the square, the financial staff of the academy looked at each other. The birth of 3 ring-bearers at the same time meant that the academy would have to fork out a large sum of money for subsidies, and their workload would increase by a lot. For the freshmen, this was undoubtedly great news. Just like when Luoya's previous life's campus recruitment, there was a giant company. And it turned out that this company was indeed a giant. The oversized guide sprite floating in the sky, its size far exceeding everyone else's, could only mean one thing, and that was that its owner had defeated an enemy whose strength was beyond imagination. And in the eyes of the guild leaders and the academy's mentors, this was what was truly worth paying attention to. Chris looked at the guide sprite with a dull expression. If she remembered correctly, according to the records, the largest guide sprite in the history of the Academy's entrance ceremony should be about 3 meters in diameter, and this white sun now, without even looking, knew that it was far larger than the record. A genius with a limitless future, and a local noble, the kind that could be pulled in. At this moment, the old men on the various platforms who were previously dispirited all became excited at the same time. Their waists were no longer sore, their legs were no longer painful, and their hunched backs could be straightened. Almost at the same time, the 8 immortals crossed the sea, each showing their magical powers, and rushed over with all their might. The guild leaders were very anxious, but the Academy's mentors were even more anxious. Joining a guild was up to you, and there was a lot of uncertainty, but if a student wanted to find a mentor, it was a matter of fact. With Luoya's ability, it was almost certain that he would become famous in the future, and when that time came, it would definitely be beneficial to the mentors themselves. The guild members and the Academy's mentors came down one by one, But at this time, Luoya did not care. The youth was experiencing an unprecedented feeling, bathing in the cheers. It had to be said that whether it was in Akhat Hill, the holy capital, or Rose, Luoya had never experienced such grand cheers, let alone the elites of the same age from St. Freya Academy. It was the highlight of his life. It would be a lie to say that he was not happy. It was better to say that he was very happy. But at the same time, Luoya did not forget the two girls who were waiting for him. Surrounded by the crowd, Nuo Iyer and Xia Luot smiled at the boy. Because Luoya belonged to the Church of St. Maester and was a close neighbor of the United Nations, the students from both sides had a good impression of him. Among the crowd, Paul was also squeezing forward, wanting to congratulate his friend first. I didn't expect that the random person I met on the way to school would be such a big shot. My school life should be much better than I imagined. Paul sighed in his heart. He followed the freshman who wanted to be the first to leave a first impression on Luoya. But after looking around, he suddenly realized that something was wrong. Why are there so many girls? Sensing something, Paul slowed down his pace. On the other side, Nuo Iyer and Xia Luot, who were surrounded by the crowd, suddenly became serious. They stared at the blushing girls in the crowd and clenched their fists. It started again. It started again. After Luoya obtained the rose ring and received attention, a large number of vixens had appeared due to the huge exposure. They were starting to form groups. Faced with this situation, the two girls naturally wouldn't let it go. They waved their hands and immediately gave the order to stop them. However, what they didn't expect was that before the two girls' subordinates and the crowd of freshmen rushed in front of Luoya, a group of old men suddenly descended from the sky and surrounded the black-haired boy. This student, I am the representative of the Transformation School, Richardson Herman. I don't know if you know anything about our Transformation School. If you are willing, how about I show you around our headquarters tomorrow? Don't listen to him. I am the representative of the Energy School, Powell. The Transformation School is something only sissies learn. A real man's romance is only explosive. Nonsense. Only a monkey without intelligence would rely on brute force. Transformation is the choice of a wise man. You people from the school, please make way. I am a regular teacher. This student, what do you think of potionology? I am a potionology lecturer and mentor, Pierre Ogre. I think you are very talented. Of course he is talented, but it is definitely not potionology. Luoya, I am the mentor of curse protection studies, Frank. I think you should know that the most important thing in a real battle is always your own life. If you can defend against it, you won't need potions. Extremely stupid. Do you think potions can only be used for treatment? There are many times when a man needs potions, not just on the battlefield. In front of Luoya, who had yet to react, the old men from the various schools met on a narrow path. The professional mentors of the academy were also enemies on a narrow road. All kinds of persuasion and cursing filled the black-haired boy's surroundings. As more and more old men and women flew over, the scene was a little out of control. Chapter 261. A week later, St. Freya Academy's Commercial Street, Broken Sword Tavern. At dusk, the commercial street was bustling with people. The doors of Broken Sword Tavern were constantly opening and closing. With the increase in popularity, the tavern had a lively atmosphere. The sound of wooden cups clinking could be heard constantly. The owner's greeting and the aroma of wine filled the air. In the corner of the second floor, a young man in a hooded cloak looked at the smiling red-haired woman in front of him. I say, Teacher Chris, is it okay for you to bring me to this kind of place? Aren't you an adult? That's not the problem. Luoya's Akit carefully looked around. At this time, the sun was setting, and the number of customers in the tavern gradually increased. The single customers at the bar were chatting and tasting wine. The two seats against the wall were chatting and laughing, and the new customers were curiously looking at the collection on the wall. Broken Sword Tavern, as its name suggested, was a tavern decorated with hundreds of broken swords on the wall. On the outside, it was an inconspicuous building made of stone and wood, but in the commercial street of St. Freya Academy, which had existed for hundreds of years, it was very famous. It was said that the owner of this tavern was a swordsman who lost all his companions in an adventure. He was also seriously injured and could no longer go on adventures. Disheartened, he returned to his former academy and opened this tavern. He kept the broken swords that had been with him for many years and placed them on the wall to show that he would never leave and move forward together. The owner's behavior was praised by many knights. Since then, this tavern had a rule. If the owner was willing, he could hand over the broken swords to the tavern and give the retired swordsman a place to stay. After so many years, there were hundreds of broken swords, and each one had detailed information next to it, and even a message from the original owner. Of course, this kind of secret and low-key tavern was basically impossible for new students to find. In fact, most of the people who entered the tavern were returning customers, senior students, teaching staff, and other staff of the tavern. This made the black-haired young man under the cloak greatly relieved. "I'm afraid of being seen, and it might cause trouble." Sighing helplessly, the black-haired young man reached for the cup on the table and took a sip of wine. The pale blue ring on his finger flashed under the dim light. The blue rose was probably the most popular term in St. Freya Academy. Ever since the entrance ceremony a week ago, Luo Ya's life had sunk into another level of fierce battle. On the second day of the opening ceremony, after the official award ceremony, Luo Ya was besieged by various schools, student organizations, and the academy's instructors. Blocking the door was a common occurrence. Various temptations were offered, and some even tried to seduce her. Of course, this kind of insensible trash was immediately eliminated by the two new ring-bearers, the Golden Rose and the Red Rose. But even so, the academy was still in turmoil. The dormitory that Luo Ya was assigned to this batch of new students was heavily monitored every day because of him. And in the dormitory, there was an endless stream of people who wanted to establish a relationship with him. 1 week after the entrance ceremony, St. Freya Academy gave the students time to familiarize themselves with the campus, choose the subjects they wanted to study, and report the course allocation. During this time, the students could choose one of the academy's instructors as their instructor. It was a bit like choosing a class teacher. 1 week seemed to be a long time, but considering the thousands of students choosing their major, the academy collecting their wishes, reporting and sorting, allocating teaching resources according to the situation, and a series of other things, 1 week was considered fast. And for Luo Ya, this week was the most aggressive week of the academy's instructors. Because he was not familiar with the schools in the country of scholars, Luo Ya did not want to get involved in this field. As for the issue of instructors, Luo Ya naturally chose Chris, who gave him the lamp oil so that he could return safely. And from another point of view, Chris was indeed one of the best choices as the Academy's sage instructor. It was just that it was not appropriate to say this out loud because it would bring a lot of trouble to Chris. So in the past few days, Luo Ya had been wandering around through the relationship between the Theocracy and Rose. He was quite jittery these days. Looking at the blue Rose, who had caused a sensation in the Academy a week ago, but was now a little scared because she was blocked at the door, the red-haired woman could not help but laugh. "I know you've been chased by those old things recently, so I brought you here to relax. After all, you'll be my disciple after tomorrow's announcement." Chris was in a good mood as he drank a mouthful of wine. He was very proud of his action of looking for Luo Ya in advance. He didn't mention his original purpose of looking for trouble. "As expected of me." The woman nodded and crossed her arms proudly. Then, she pointed to a corner of the wall. "Of course, there's another reason other than relaxing. I brought you to this corner for that." The black-haired youth followed Chris's hand and looked to the side. In the next moment, he couldn't help but be stunned. On the wall next to Luo Ya, a slender broken sword was hanging on the wall. Looking at the style, it should be modern. Because of the maintenance spell, it didn't look old. Instead, it looked like it had just been broken. At the bottom left of the sword holder, there was a line of simple description in small print. In November of the year 988, it broke in the ruins at the foot of the Fu-Air mountain range. With this sword, it saved 3 people. Kadia, Akat. The first time I came to this tavern, it was my senior who brought me here. Now you know why I brought you here. Chris smiled and looked at the broken sword on the wall. Her face was full of nostalgia. Opposite her, the black-haired youth was already dumbfounded. What's going on? Senior? My father? Wait, could it be that before? Luoya looked at teacher Chris, who was opposite her. The conversation between the two of them a week ago started to appear in her mind. Her face couldn't help but gradually become strange. Teacher Chris, how's your letter coming along? What's the content? Chapter 262. Ringbearers were, to some extent, the highest position in St. Freya Academy. They were an honor that the students earned with their own strength and could not be stripped away. Compared to them, even the dean could be replaced. Of course, the dean could only be replaced in name. In reality, it was impossible. Even if Antonio were to get Alzheimer's from today onwards and dress up as a woman and go square dancing every day, it would take a year and a half to replace him according to the normal procedure. As the Blue Rose, who had the highest grades in history and fed the guide elf the most, Luo Yu's treatment was naturally not bad. In fact, when the academy gave this record holder his own building and training ground, he was given the choice to choose. This kind of right to choose was very comfortable. St. Freya Academy provided Luoya with many choices, but there were three that were the most tempting. The first was a tower in the main campus, the second was a villa complex by the lake, and the third was a manor by the mountain far away. In terms of area, although the tower was tall, it had the smallest area nearby. The manor included the forest beside it, so it was much larger. The largest was the villa complex by the lake. As long as he took it, the whole lake would be Luo Yu's. But as the saying goes, quality is more important than quantity. In terms of land value, every inch of land in the central campus was worth gold. It was the busiest area in the vast St. Freya Academy. The food street was so close that it could be seen with the naked eye. The commercial area was also very close. All kinds of campus activities were held here, and it had a somewhat urbanized feel. Without a doubt, with this place as the base of Blue Rose's faction, he could fully enjoy the life in the academy. He could go downstairs and eat the food from the specialty stalls in the campus. He could immediately know about the discounts in the commercial area. He could participate in campus activities when he went out and watch concerts when he opened the window. Every day, he could sleep in until 10 minutes before class started. This was the ideal campus life for many students who lived in remote dormitories. With convenient transportation, one could enjoy one's youth to the fullest. If it was in his previous life, Luoya would definitely have bought this place on the spot. However, in Shiya and St. Freya Academy, a training ground related to supernatural powers was also a very important factor. In this aspect, the tower was not suitable. It was obvious that a large training ground could not be built in this central area. On the other side, the villa complex by the lake was much cheaper, but the accommodation conditions were the best. Basically, it was a single small villa with a beautiful view of the lake. It was a sacred place for couples to date. If there was nothing to do, they could even go boating. The school's aquatic activities and projects were all carried out here. The training ground was connected to the land and the water, and it was very wide. For students who cultivated water-related spells, it was the best choice in school. It was about half an hour's walk from the center of the academy. It would take more than 10 minutes to move with the unique curse vessel train in the academy. The distance could only be said to be neither too far nor too close. It was similar to the suburbs, and it was similar to the various dormitory areas. There were no convenient attributes. The last one, the manor in the mountain, was not worth mentioning. The location was close to the edge of the academy. It could be said to be relatively remote. It took a few hours to walk from the center of the academy. Even if one took the curse vessel train, it would take an hour to get there. The transportation was very inconvenient. But in contrast, the whole building was quite magnificent. The interior decoration was also very luxurious. It was said that it was built during the heyday of the great aristocrats of Austin in the past. The training ground was quite large. Of course, these attributes were all secondary. What really gave this building an advantage over the other two was the mountain where the manor was located. To put it simply, this mountain had a secret realm. Watcher Valley. This was a special secret realm that could only be entered near the mountain forest like Demon's Night. However, unlike the completely safe Demon's Night, this secret realm, which seemed to have a much milder name, was actually dangerous, but the probability was relatively low. Every time Watcher Valley opened, the team that entered would be forced to apply a special life-binding curse. Unless everyone died, they would be forcibly petrified when they were fatally injured. They would become a watcher waiting for their teammates to rescue them. In this case, after eliminating the monster, they would be pulled out of the secret realm to remove the petrification. But if the entire team was wiped out or stayed in the secret realm for more than 3 days, then the petrification would be automatically lifted. The person who was fatally injured would basically die. In general, this secret realm was not very dangerous. As long as there was a person at the entrance who could escape at any time to report the news, they could more or less avoid being wiped out. But occasionally, people who entered would go too far, or like the victims in the records, were buried because the terrain changed during the battle and could not be found. Then, they would really be dead. For a long time, because of this reason, Watcher Valley had not been included in the practical teaching of the Academy. After all, losing a battle in this secret realm was equivalent to going missing. A few small teams would be fine, but if thousands of people were scattered all at once, hundreds of people would go missing. Even if the search and rescue team knew the location, they would be exhausted to death. It was certainly not possible to use it on a large scale, but it was still barely usable for the actual combat of a small elite team. After all, if they wanted to engage in actual combat, they would have to follow the mentors or ringbearers on missions. In that case, there was no guarantee that they would be in danger. Such 3 options were placed in front of Luoya. For a time, he was quite hesitant. But as the saying goes, you can't have your cake and eat it too. After careful consideration, Luoya decided to choose the manor with the secret realm. There were 3 main reasons for choosing this place. The first and most important reason was that Luoya had analyzed the composition of his faction members. As a noble of the Saint Mestre theocracy, Luoya was originally the second in command of the Nuwa Ire group. Normally, he should be managing the faction on behalf of Her Royal Highness. But now that he had become an ringbearer, he naturally could not work for Miss Angel. After all, ringbearers were equal in name. But even if he did not work for them, he could not poach from the corner of the Saint Mestre theocracy. Similarly, the elites of Rose were under the jurisdiction of the 2 girls. So after careful consideration, Luoya targeted the local civilians, the children of merchants, and the lower-born nobles. This group could be said to be the most hard-working group in the St. Freya Academy. Most of them did not have anything to inherit after graduation, so they entered the academy to improve themselves. As a person who had been forced to constantly improve himself from a young age, Luoya was very willing to provide a channel for these hardworking people. Of course, Luoya was not a pure Mr. Nice Guy. The second reason he chose this place was to recruit a group of talents for Akat Hill. After all, these students who did not have the inheritance of their ancestors needed to find a job after graduation. And as the acting lord of his own territory, Luoya could directly make the decision to recruit people without any notice. The third reason was the problem of the secret realm. As a secret realm, the Watcher Valley was not completely safe. There were many problems, but the main problem was that it was difficult to find people. But this problem was not a problem for Luoya because he had the help of Pei-Tila. Where were the people buried? The search and rescue team could not find them, but how could the Mother Earth not find them? The most difficult problem to solve in the Watcher Valley was not a problem for Luoya at all. Because of this, Luoya chose it. On the other hand, Luoya was also full of interest in the existence of the secret realm. After making a clear choice, the academy began to send special staff to clean and renovate the building. It would take about half a month. Luoya did not need to care about this. It was better to say that he was busy with other things now. Yesterday at the Broken Sword Tavern, Luoya, who chose not to interfere, drank a lot with Chris. After re-examining the character of this mentor, he finally came to the conclusion that Chris was really a very pure person. Whether it was liking or disliking, Chris never hid it. Generally speaking, he was the same on the surface. It was just that he had developed some bad habits after so many years of being heartbroken, such as smoking when he was anxious. But compared to that, he had more advantages. The most obvious one was his attentiveness. In order to let Luoya catch up with his classes as soon as possible, he even found a senior to tutor him. In St. Freya's Academy, after choosing a mentor, they would have to attend the mentor's class. However, unlike the other majors, the mentor's class was attended by students of all grades. The content of the class differed according to the mentor, and among them, Chris's classroom was famous for its high difficulty. If there was no help, even if Luoya had a certain foundation, it would probably take him half a year to gradually integrate into the class. But if there were senior students to tutor him, it would be a different story. Chapter 263. Inside the classroom, the black-haired girl calmly agreed to her tutor's request without any fluctuations in her heart. This wasn't Lillian's first time as a remedial teacher. Last year, as the representative of the second grade, Lillian was the most outstanding student in Chris' classroom to give remedial lessons to the first-grade female students. They were the same tutor, but this special relationship fluctuated according to the number of students in St. Freya Academy. The difference was huge. For example, Tutor Freya, who had the most students, was naturally not bad at teaching, but the most important reason why the number of students far exceeded others was actually because his exams were simple. Failing in exams was not only a nightmare for students in Luoya's previous life, but also a burden that students in St. Freya Academy could not bear. There were two main reasons. One was to spend money, and the other was to quit school. Failing exams naturally meant retaking classes, and retaking classes naturally meant repaying fees. Whoring for free. Haha, that did not exist. Not only that, in order to leave a deep impression on the students, the tuition fee for retaking classes was doubled. Double the tuition fee for St. Freya Academy was not a small sum of money. As for quitting school, it was even simpler. Every year, failing more than 5 compulsory and elective classes would directly be judged by the Academy as passive and neglectful. If they failed the make-up exam again at the beginning of the semester, they would immediately be expelled from the Academy. Under such a strict system, there were many students quitting school every year. As the first grade who had just entered the Academy, the probability of quitting school was the highest among all the grades. At this time, there was a tutor who often used the same questions in class for his exams. This kind of caring and warmth was undoubtedly touching. In Luoya's previous life, this kind of person was called a living bodhisattva, but in Shiya's St. Freya Academy, he was called the Light of Salvation, Freya. Every year, Tutor Freyle's classes had a few hundred students, but the demand did not meet the demand. Every year, students were madly snatched up, and the student quota could even be sold at a high price on the black market. However, there were also corresponding pros and cons. The students who gathered under this tutor would definitely not fail his classes, but there was basically no camaraderie to speak of. Everyone was here to freeload points. Who could differentiate between the hundreds of people? If they bumped into each other and found out that they were from the same sect, they would at most praise their teacher together, and that would be it. The Freely classroom was the representative of the large classrooms, and the students were generally indifferent to each other. The Chris classroom, on the other hand, was on the other end of the spectrum. It only nurtured the cream of the crop, and the exam was extremely difficult. There were even cases where all the students failed and had to retake the exam. However, every year, there would be a few outstanding graduates. Ever since Chris had graduated, he had been teaching at the school for a total of 18 years, but he had taught more than 100 outstanding graduates. This kind of proud result was because of the high difficulty of teaching and the strict examination. There was no doubt that compared to the relaxed and happy environment of the Freely classroom, the Chris classroom was under a lot of pressure. In the many years of teaching, there had been students who could not bear the pressure and even held grudges. However, when these people entered society, they would come back to thank their strict tutor for their hard work, whether it was because of the huge benefits they had received or because they had escaped a disaster. To a certain extent, the laziness now would be the suffering in the future. This was the life philosophy that the graduates had comprehended. For the students in the school, It was normal for them to help each other in the face of such a difficult exam. In addition, there were very few students in the Chris classroom, and there were only a few students in each batch. Therefore, the camaraderie between the students was very deep. One of the reasons why Lillian chose Chris as her tutor was that Chris, who came from the country of scholars, had a neutral stance and would not try to curry favor or be hostile toward others. The other reason was that she had taken a fancy to his strict teaching and huge and vibrant connections. One must know that Chris had trained 100 outstanding graduates in less than 20 years. The earliest batch was only in their early 30s and had yet to reach the prime of their lives. It could be said that each and every one of them had great potential, and as time passed, their influence would only grow. Even for a princess like Lillian, such a group of people was a huge resource of connections. The situation in the Austin Empire had gotten worse in recent years, and no one could predict what would happen in the future. It was necessary to accumulate strength in case of any accidents. Of course, this was Lillian's original intention. However, after 2 years of studying, Chris had become one of her rare friends, and the two of them had a good relationship. Therefore, Lillian agreed without much thought when Chris asked her to tutor the first-year students this year. "Are there a lot of students this year?" "No, I only took in one this year." "Is that so? And it's a girl?" No, it's a boy this time." The red-haired woman was a little embarrassed when she said that. Lillian frowned slightly at her words. Although it sounded a little narcissistic, Lillian had been with boys for a long time, and the boys would always confess to her. The previous batch of students were all girls, so Lillian's tutoring went smoothly. However, it was a boy this time, and this situation was a little troublesome. Perhaps Chris sensed the black-haired girl's thoughts, so she helplessly added, "I can't help it. That boy's talent is too high, and I don't think the others are up to the task. Actually, I wanted to do it myself, but that would seem too biased and unfair to everyone." "I see. Besides, in terms of identity, as Rose, you're more suitable." "HM? Wait." The black-haired girl's eyes narrowed slightly when she noticed something wrong with Chris's words. Before she could ask, there was a knock on the classroom door. The next moment, the door was pushed open, and a young man in a cloak and scarf greeted the tutor as he removed his equipment. "Ah, Teacher Chris, you're here. This is the... you are." Luo Ya's greeting came to an abrupt halt when she saw the familiar face. After realizing the identity of the newcomer, the black-haired girl widened her eyes and stood up. The two of them looked at each other, and the rings on their hands shone under the light. They looked at each other in silence. Chapter 264. In the silent classroom, Luoya Akit and Lillian Akit sat side by side, 2 seats apart from each other. Teacher Chris stood in front and looked at the silent and strange combination. He didn't know what to do. That shouldn't be the case. Luoya just entered the school, and he shouldn't have come into contact with Lillian for the past week. Why are the two of them so cold to each other? It's as if there's a grudge between them. The red-haired woman was puzzled. Chris naturally didn't know that the first thing Luoya did after entering the school was to have a game with Lillian. However, what she didn't know was that while she was confused, Luoya was even more confused. At this moment, the black-haired young man's mind was blank. There was only one question echoing in his mind. Question: how do I get along with the target that the ancestor has decided to make pregnant? Waiting online. It's quite urgent. The black-haired young man's head went numb. If it was before entering the secret realm, Luoya would at least know when to advance and retreat when he saw Lillian. But now, as soon as he saw Lillian's face, he couldn't help but think of Roy's reminder when he patted him on the shoulder. It's fine if I make her pregnant, but to do it behind her back? Thinking of Luoya, this scumbag couldn't help but feel guilty. He always felt that he was planning a crime. Without the moral high ground, his momentum naturally weakened. Because Luoya had been hiding for the past week and it was impossible for him to change his teacher, he didn't properly collect information about Professor Chris's class. Now, the sudden change caught him off guard. Luoya, whose mind was filled with the gift from the ancestor, was so embarrassed that he couldn't say a word. On the other side, the black-haired girl was thinking more. Is he doing it on purpose? Lillian thought about this question. Although she didn't move, her eyes gradually sharpened. As the princess of the Austin Empire, in terms of reputation, Lillian was definitely the representative of Chris's classroom. If Luoyu applied for Chris as a teacher, it was impossible for him not to know that she was here. But his reaction when he entered the classroom. The girl recalled Luo Yu's stunned expression and shook her head slightly in her heart. At that moment, the young man's reaction didn't seem to be fake. Lillian was very sure of this. In other words, it's a coincidence? If that's the case, to a certain extent, it might be a good thing. In the current first year of St. Freya Academy, Nuwa Iyer of the Theocracy and Xiaoluot of Rosset had both become ring-bearers. But it had to be said that these two parties were naturally hostile to Lillian of the Austin Empire. From a safe point of view, the two parties should avoid meeting each other except during the Rose Council meeting. But Luoya was different. Luoya was indeed a noble of the Theocracy of St. Maester, but he wasn't a member of the central government. Instead, he was a local noble and didn't have a direct conflict with the Austin royal family. Besides, he had a good relationship with the other two ring-bearers of the first year. As a bridge of communication, or rather, a buffer, it couldn't be better. Most importantly, if she were to reject the tutoring mission now, it would be equivalent to showing a cowardly attitude. Lillian couldn't afford to show weakness like this. Besides, speaking of cowardly, how could a teacher possibly do that now? Say, do you two know each other before? After holding it in for a long time, Chris finally couldn't help but ask about the situation between the two. As soon as the words left his mouth, the two shook their heads. Not really, we've only met once before. It's not so much a meeting. It's better to say that it's a matter of position. Lillian said so in a cold voice. Her purple pupils were emotionless. She was still wary of Luo Yu's contact with Paul, but Chris, who didn't know about these things, didn't care so much. If that's the case, how about introducing yourselves to each other first? You two will be in the same classroom in the future. Although it's a little self-deprecating, I'm afraid that our classroom won't be able to recruit many people in the future. Besides, you two will definitely have to interact with each other, even if it's not with me. Huh? What do you mean? Luoya was a little puzzled after hearing the teacher's words, while Lillian's eyes flickered and remained silent. Chris raised his eyebrows slightly and explained. If I remember correctly, you're both of the creation branch, right? Creation branch? No, I'm from the summoning branch. Yes, you're from the summoning branch when you sign up, but the actual combat teaching is independent. It can be regarded as a branch of the summoning branch. It's a special branch that has been independent from the summoning branch in recent decades. It's specially set up for people with special circumstances like you. The black-haired boy was stunned for a while after listening to Chris's words. According to this sage teacher, the summoning branch seemed to be related to his bloodline ability, but in fact, the relationship was quite limited because the definition of the word, summon, was more similar to transportation. It was the most common situation of the summoning branch to transport existing things to the side through the method of summoning. Therefore, the things they summoned were already existing. Whether it was summoning fire spirits or undead spirits, it was the same principle. But Luo Yu's situation was different. He was more similar to summoning the soul or consciousness of an ancient existence and using curse power to construct a body according to the soul in the present world to fight. In other words, he was creating something out of nothing. That was why it was named the creation branch. And unlike the summoning branch, which did not require the use of curse power after the summoning, Luo Yu's supply of curse power could not be stopped during the process. Once the supply was stopped, the body constructed by Luo Yu's curse power would disintegrate because it could not bear the powerful souls of Gulandair and the others. Chris grasped the key points and explained in a few sentences, which made Luo Yu suddenly enlightened. He finally understood where the dissonance in his heart came from, but then a new question emerged. Lillian is also from the creation branch. Chapter 265. In the empty classroom, Luoya leaned against the table and sighed helplessly as he watched Lillian leave through the door. After a series of communications, Luoya had basically confirmed that Lillian didn't want to have a good relationship with him and wanted to keep a distance from him instead. Regarding this situation, Luoya was honestly a little puzzled. In his communications with Lillian, he had always felt a faint sense of inconsistency. For example, the reasons Lillian gave seemed reasonable, but on the other hand, there were also many benefits to maintaining a good relationship with Luoya. Although it was normal for people to consider problems from different perspectives, Luoya still felt that it was impossible for someone as intelligent as Lillian to not have thought of it. Could it be that something interfered with her choice? Luoya thought so, and shook his head after a moment. These groundless guesses weren't what he needed to do now. In fact, he still had a lot of things to do. The Ring of the Black Rose was an inheritance that Luoya received from his ancestors. It was also the culprit that allowed his guiding spirit to grow to a diameter of 5 meters. But it had to be said that Luoya hadn't worn the ring in the week since he received it. Being chased by a group of old men every day, Luoya was really worried that someone who recognized the ring would see it. And according to Roy, the Ring of the Black Rose would give guidance, which was undoubtedly a problem. What exactly was the so-called guidance? Luoya didn't know, so after weighing the pros and cons, he decided to study it in detail after he got his own territory. The sound of students' footsteps gradually increased in the corridor outside the door. The noise made Luoya interrupt his thoughts and walk out of the classroom. Chris chose this time before the morning class to let Luoya meet Senior Lillian. After accomplishing this goal, it was naturally time for class. The classes in the first half of the first year were relatively basic and mostly academic. The main purpose was to cultivate the students' learning habits and abilities. For example, Luoya's first class in school was mathematics, which reminded him of the advanced mathematics classes in university in his previous life. But the difficulty of the class and the classroom couldn't be compared at all. There was no doubt that the difficulty of the courses was relatively simple compared to his previous life, but the classrooms were truly imposing. Most of the teaching buildings in St. Freya's Academy were made of stone with hundreds of years of history, but because they were well maintained, they did not look old. The academic classes were arranged in a staircase model, and the windows had plenty of natural light, so it was exceptionally bright. The seat was made of a single piece of wood. The wood used was warm wood from the Austin Empire. It was a kind of tree that contained curse power that could adjust the temperature. Regardless of whether the outside world was cold or warm, it wouldn't be affected too much. Chairs made of this kind of wood were the same. It wasn't too hard to sit on, and it was quite comfortable. It was one of the specialties of the Austin Empire. In addition, there were reliefs with a long history, exquisite chandeliers, soft carpets, incense burners that exuded a delicate fragrance, and all kinds of aristocratic items could be seen everywhere. It completely subverted Luoya's impression of a traditional school. He also understood why St. Freya's Academy was called an aristocratic school and why the tuition was so expensive. For example, the incense burner not only looked beautiful, but it was also a curse vessel. The burning incense was also specially made and had the effect of refreshing the mind. Many other parts in the classroom were the same. They were all curse vessels that were beneficial to learning. To be honest, Roja felt that it would be very difficult to fail in this kind of classroom. With so much gold and silver, he was afraid that even a pig who knows how to speak could pass the passing line. Is this the power of money? I love it. I love it. Luoya looked around the classroom and said to himself. As a person who went to school almost all his life in his previous life, Luoya had a small habit. He liked to sit in the last row in class because he didn't like the feeling of a group of people looking at him from behind. It made him feel insecure. Of course, he knew that this was actually an illusion. After all, everyone looked at the teacher and the mobile phone in class. The latter might be more common. But in St. Freya's Academy, Luoya knew that this was not an illusion. It was better to say that until now, wherever he went, he was in a state of being watched. Feeling that many students in front of him deliberately looked back, Luoya sighed helplessly. He had no good way to deal with this situation at present. He could only let time dilute the students' curiosity. Fortunately, as it was the first class at St. Freya's Academy, the freshmen still attached great importance to it, and their attitude in class was generally very serious. Because there were too many freshmen, a basic subject like mathematics was divided according to the student's teacher. For example, as a student of teacher Chris, Luoya, who was alone, attended the class with the largest number of students, freely classroom. It was also because of this that Nuo Iyer and Xiaoluo were not by his side. The two girls' respective retinue of noble elites followed them to become the students of the same teacher. They were Catherine Classroom, of the St. Mestre Theocracy, and Laura Classroom, of the Rose Business United Nations. Catherine Classroom's specialty was ritualistic curses, including healing, purification, and many other fields. At first glance, it was clear that they had a close relationship with the Holy See. Teacher Catherine West was the daughter of the head of one of the 5 major noble families in the theocracy, the Marquis West family. It was basically impossible for her to have any crooked thoughts, and their relationship could be said to be quite solid. Laura Classroom was the strongest classroom for astrology and prophecy curses. The most famous thing was probably the accurate prediction of the Great Storm in the Scholar Country a few decades ago. The Supreme Council responded and made adjustments accordingly, greatly reducing the casualties and property losses of the people. As for Laura herself, she was even more reliable, and her surname was Serofia. Teacher Laura was, strictly speaking, Xiaoluo's great-aunt. In Rose, she was also a well-known representative of the Serofia family. It was naturally reassuring for such a person to teach their own juniors. Since then, the 3 first-year ring-bearers had been assigned, and Luoya had no fate with the 2 girls in the academic class. It was impossible for the situation of the local tyrant, holding the central leader hostage during the opening ceremony. Nuo Iyer and Xiaoluo were naturally unwilling to have such an assignment, but considering the problem of distraction during class, they didn't say anything. After all, as the heirs of 2 countries, Nuo Iyer and Xiaoluo came to school with a mission and purpose. At the very least, they couldn't have bad grades, so it was necessary for them to pay attention in class. Although there was a gap due to different natural learning abilities, if one wanted to be a top student, they had to put in some effort, especially in St. Freya Academy. Even geniuses like Nuo Iyer and Xiaoluo could be overtaken if they slacked off. Of course, Luoya liked this assignment the most. After all, when he thought of Nuo Iyer's little tricks in class, Luoya felt his brain heat up. Miss Angel seemed to have awakened a new sadist attribute recently. She liked to secretly do some shameful things in public to observe Luoya's reaction. Every time she saw Luoya's frightened face, she would get excited. Xiaoluo wasn't far behind. She could always come up with some strange ideas, such as the groundbreaking concept of couple outfits in this world. She even wanted to design it herself. Although the outfits weren't out yet, Luoya could already imagine the chaos that would occur if Nuo Iyer found out. After school started, Nuo Iyer and Xiaoluo each had their own private building and training ground. More and more students were wearing the golden rose and red rose insignia on their chests. Luoya didn't have ready-made troops like the Theocracy and Luoya, so he had to recruit from scratch. Fortunately, Luoya's reputation was out there, so it wasn't difficult to recruit people. After a morning of classes, Luoya finished his lunch and left the central campus. According to the schedule from a week ago, Luoya's mountain manor, Sangji Hall, was more or less ready to live in. After an hour of bumpy ride, the youth arrived in front of the blue-themed building for the first time. Overall, the scale of this mountain secret realm exceeded Luoya's expectations. From the spacious entrance to the courtyard, to the fountain, to the size and luxury of the main building, Luoya was very satisfied. As its backyard, the secret realm of MT Mist was rich in resources. It was more than enough to hunt for wild animals. Under the guidance of the staff, Luoya walked through the corridor that was decorated in a traditional style. It had a luxurious style unique to the second era of the Austin Empire. Luoya's heart was filled with the joy of freeloading. After a general tour of the building and confirming the location, Luoya began to consider the recruitment of faction members, which was the problem of people. Although there was a bit of suspicion of cheating, Luoya actually had information about the future of many people in the game. Therefore, to a certain extent, he could be targeted. Therefore, he wasn't in a hurry. After thinking for a while, night fell. After tasting the cooking of Zhangji Hall, Luoya felt that it was passable. He silently looked at the black ring in his hand in the spacious master bedroom. Chapter 266. This is. The moment the black-haired youth opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was the dusky sky. A cold breeze blew on his body, and the sound of trees swaying in the wind echoed in his ears. Luoya felt the hard ground without any softness under his body. His golden pupils were filled with confusion. He turned his head slightly to the left and right and found that there was nothing around him. So cold. This isn't a dream? The youth who was awakened by the cold shivered slightly. The overly realistic touch made Luoya keenly feel that something was wrong. He sat up and found that he seemed to be on a rooftop. His slightly higher vision allowed him to see something familiar. It was the top part of a building with a pointed roof. It looked like a tall tower, and it should have been built a few hundred years ago. The reason why Luoya recognized it was very simple. It was because it was one of the candidates for the headquarters of the Green Rose sect, the tower in the center of the academy. When he saw this building, Luoya finally woke up completely. He suddenly got up and ran to the edge of the rooftop. He looked down at the vast campus in front of him and was stunned for a moment. What's going on? Am I kidnapped again? No, that's impossible. The overly bizarre thought only lasted for a moment before it was rejected by Luoya. Not to mention the possibility of being unknowingly taken out of the mountains to the center of the campus as a force source level extraordinaire. The main point was that Luoya had Goulandair and Paytila by his side. Although Goulandair and Paytila usually stayed in their own spaces and occasionally seemed to visit each other, the passage between them and Luoya was always connected. Unless it was a close relationship like Nuwa Iyer or Xia Luot. If anyone wanted to do anything to Luoya while he was asleep, the two ancient gods would definitely discover it. Once there was danger, they would even urgently use Luoya's curse power to forcefully appear. It was completely impossible for him to be taken away by some inexplicable person and left on the rooftop to be blown by the wind. Did this mean that there was something special going on? Could it be that the Nuwa Iyer wanted to come to the rooftop to play with him? No matter what, this is still. Luoya, who had no clue, shook his head and stopped the dirty thoughts in his mind. He decided to contact the huge skeleton and Mother Earth. However, in the next second, Luoya's face suddenly turned ugly. How could this be? The black-haired youth widened his eyes in disbelief. Could it be that the passageway was gone? In the 5 years since he had obtained the crown origin substance and met the Goulandair, this was the first time that Luoya had been unable to contact the ancient gods in a non-historical situation. Could it be that we're currently in a historical episode? Did I accidentally trigger something? Luoya muttered to himself and forced himself to calm down. However, after thinking about it seriously and sensing the origin substance for a while, he still rejected this possibility. As Luoya's bloodline ability, he could clearly sense it once it was activated. Moreover, even in a historical episode, the passageway of the ancient gods would only be temporarily blocked by the new ancient gods, just like Paytila back then. However, the passageway had now disappeared as if it had never appeared. This also represented an extremely terrifying matter. Luoya could no longer borrow the power of the ancient gods, even if it was only a weakened version of their bodies. Calm down. The ability of the origin substance cannot be changed. In reality, it's impossible for me to lose the ability to summon the Goulandair and the others. Therefore, by inference, this isn't reality. Is it a dream or something else? The reason for this appearance, is it because of the ring? Luoya pinched the space between his eyebrows as he analyzed. He remembered that before going to sleep, he did not take off the black rose ring. Connecting this to Roy's words earlier, could this be the so-called guidance? The black-haired youth looked down at St. Freya Academy in the middle of the night. It was already past midnight, and the bustling campus during the day was now deathly silent. Specks of light dotted the huge buildings, but not only did it not give off a feeling of brightness, it made other places seem even darker. Quiet, too quiet. Such a thought appeared in Luo Yu's mind, and the youth suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. The dark campus, the absence of the ancient gods, and the strange silence all gathered together raised Luo Yu's vigilance to the extreme. He glanced behind him and saw that the door leading to the rooftop was wide open. The wooden door swayed left and right in the wind, but it was completely dark inside, as if it was the mouth of a beast that came out of nowhere. I have to take a look. Such a thought appeared in Luo Yu's mind. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.